On my first day time traveling to the Middle Ages, there was actually a long queue outside the local lord's castle handing out wives. What was even more outrageous was that not only were they giving them away for free, but as long as you took a girl home, the lord would subsidize you with 300 copper coins as a breeding subsidy. However, I refused, simply because I had transmigrated as a blind man. It was hard enough to feed myself in the cruel Middle Ages, so how could I feed a wife? However, when the last remaining girl knelt before me, begging me to take her away so her alcoholic father wouldn't beat her to death today, my heart still softened. I told her frankly that I was a blind man, might not be able to provide for her, and might even have to rely on her to feed me. If she didn't mind, she could come with me. She was incredibly relieved, nodding like crazy, saying she didn't mind at all. Just like that, I picked up a free wife named Alara. The kind-hearted neighbor, old Tom, escorted us to my dilapidated, drafty mutant thatch hut that didn't even have a wooden board for a bed, and then left. Alara stared blankly at this bridal chamber that was dozens of times shabbier than her own home, but I could only bite the bullet and comfort her, saying days would get better. This silly girl didn't run away. Instead, she took the initiative to hold my cane and led me to the Lord's Hall to sign the marriage certificate and claim the 300 copper coin reward. We walked for over an hour on the way there. At noon, she helped me sit down to rest. I felt the bundle under my rear was very soft. Asking casually, I found out she had stuffed dry straw into the bundle to make a cushion for me, while she herself was going to sit on the muddy ground. I grabbed her and forcefully made her sit on the bundle. The girl was so moved her voice trembled. Hugging my arm tightly, she said that even if I was blind, she had set her heart on me, and from now on, she would be my eyes. This sentence completely hit my soft spot. In the afternoon, the marriage certificate was completed, and the Lord readily handed over the 300 copper coins. Alara was so excited she kept calling me hubby, her face burning red. I was dizzy with hunger and suggested going to the tavern for a good meal, but Alara adamantly refused. She insisted on buying some inferior rye to boil into mush at home, because every single copper coin had to be carefully budgeted to survive until the autumn harvest. I directly cupped her face and asked if she believed in me. At the exact moment my hands touched her cheeks, a miracle happened. A clear 3D modeled face suddenly popped into my mind. Following the tactile sensation of my fingers, the details of this face were completely filled in. A delicate oval face, long eyelashes, pure and lively. How was this an ugly duckling? As long as her nutrition caught up, this was absolutely a fairy-tier beautiful wife with a baseline score of 90 out of 100. I had completely hit the jackpot. Feeling confident, I retracted my hands and directly took the bewildered Alara to the tavern, where we devoured 2 large bowls of thick beef stew. Spending 8 copper coins made her heart ache so much she shed tears. After eating and drinking our fill, I told her not to feel bad. What was spent today, I would earn back tenfold tomorrow. She told me to spend less, but I ignored her pleas and went on a shopping spree at the market. 10 pounds of wheat, 10 pounds of fatty pork that even dogs wouldn't eat, a few pounds of expensive white sugar, along with a cast iron pot and a wide-backed chef's knife, both extremely expensive in the kingdom. 268 copper coins were spent in a flash. By the time we returned to the rundown thatched hut in Oakhaven village, it was already dark. I had Alara build a stove and light a fire. I diced the fatty pork and threw it into the pot, rendering over a pound of snow-white lard. After dinner, blushing, Alara laid out the dry hay on the ground, so nervous her body was stiff, and stuttered a reminder that it was time to sleep. She knew exactly what was about to happen on a medieval wedding night. I looked at the drafty roof and almost laughed out loud. What was the difference between this and sleeping outdoors? I completely dispelled her worries, telling her to sleep peacefully, and that we would talk about making babies after we built a new house. She breathed a long sigh of relief, ran to the innermost corner to lie down, and spent the whole night in fearful anticipation. The next morning, I snapped my eyes open. Although my eyes still couldn't see, I found that my 5 senses had sharpened to a terrifying degree. Hearing, smell, and physical fitness had entirely doubled. Even more outrageously, a holographic modeled world with me at the center and a radius of 5 meters appeared in my mind. Every detail in the thatched hut, including the soundly sleeping Alara, was clearly visible. I named the superpower the mind's eye. I got up, picked up the knife, and prepared to make breakfast. Alara was woken by the noise and was terrified, thinking I was going to do something drastic. After washing up, I began to show my true skills. I heated the pot, melted the lard, poured in the high-tech corn seeds I had hidden in my belt when I transmigrated, and shook the pot crazily. Hearing the crackling sounds from the pot, Alara's eyes almost popped out. A small bowl of seeds had actually popped into a huge pot of puffed rice. Next, I melted the white sugar and water, poured in the popcorn, mixed it evenly, and molded it into balls by hand after it cooled. The honey caramel popcorn ball, a snack absolutely unique in the Middle Ages, was born. The cost was less than 10 copper coins, and I priced them at 1 copper coin each. In the afternoon, carrying a bamboo basket filled with 200 popcorn balls, I took Alara straight to the grand market of the kingdom's capital, London City. Once there, Alara was too shy to open her mouth, so I just let my voice out and hawked the goods. Soon, a mother and son were attracted. I smoothly used a sales pitch to provoke them, and the kid ran off with the popcorn ball to show off to other noble kids. This hunger marketing tactic worked wonders. In less than half an hour, dozens of kids and adults surrounded us. 200 popcorn balls sold out in an hour. Looking at the heavy 200 copper coins in her hands, Alara trembled with excitement. We immediately went to buy more corn and new bamboo baskets, working overtime through the night to make 600 more. The next day, we went back to the grand market and completely sold out again. Deducting the costs, we netted over 500 copper coins a day. Alara had never seen so much money in her life, and she looked at me with pure worship. Over the next half-month, we stuck to making exactly 600 a day. London City had a population of hundreds of thousands. This tiny supply wasn't even enough to fill the gaps between their teeth. Popcorn balls completely blew up across every street and alley. Relying on this exclusive business, we saved up a full 5 silver coins. I hired a carpenter to make a large oak bed and bought plenty of wool bedding. Every night, sleeping while holding Alarawo's nutrition was catching up and whose figure was becoming more and more devilish. Life was beautiful. But today, I decided to halt production. Holding the 5 silver coins, Alara excitedly suggested using this huge sum to build a draft-free wooden house. I shook my head directly. What's a wooden house? If I'm going to build, I'm building a grand manor with a courtyard, red bricks, and a slate roof. Alara was dumbfounded. Only knights and baron lords could afford grand red brick houses. I didn't explain. I just pulled her along to find our savior, Old Tom, and asked him to gather all the villagers at the village square. Alara panicked, thinking I was going to give the secret recipe away for free, crying tears of anxiety. I told her that even if the two of us worked ourselves to death, we could only make 600 a day. What I wanted to play was the distribution model. In the square, the village chief Sir Gareth, a retired old knight, and all 200 plus people in the village were present. Standing on a millstone, I directly opened my hand, displaying the 5 shiny silver coins to everyone. The entire village gasped instantly, their eyes turning red with envy. A soldier's annual pay was only 5 silver coins, and I had earned that in half a month. Looking at their shocked faces, I dropped a bombshell. I planned to select a group of women in the village and wholesale the popcorn balls to you at 1 copper coin for 2. You go to the city and sell them for 1 copper coin each, pocketing half as pure profit. Those without capital can take the goods first and settle the bill after selling. As soon as these words came out, the whole village exploded. Earning dozens of copper coins a day was basically a pie falling from the sky for serfs who depended on the weather to eat. Sir Gareth grabbed my hand excitedly to confirm over and over. My single sentence, when poor, mind oneself. When wealthy, lift the world, directly moved this retired old knight to tears. He drew his sword on the spot to stand up for me, cursing out the villagers who had previously gossiped behind my back. Instantly, over 50 village women surrounded me tightly, frantically signing up. Early the next morning, I distributed all the popcorn balls we made overnight to these 50-plus people. Just as I finished, Old Tom's disabled wife, Aunt Mary, limped over, blushing as she said they had nothing to eat at home, and begged for a few to sell. Without a second word, I pulled out 100 copper coins and hired Old Tom and his wife at a high salary to work full-time at my house making popcorn balls. A life-saving grace must be repaid abundantly. By evening, the village women who went to the city to sell goods all returned. Not a single item was left. Without even stepping out of my house, I netted 2,300 copper coins a day lying down. As life improved, the range of my mind's eye wildly expanded to a diameter of 30 meters. Throwing away my cane, I walked smoother than a normal person. With money in their pockets, every household in the village looked at me like I was the god of wealth. The time was ripe. I carried 2 bags of snacks to visit the village chief, Sir Gareth. This old man had horses and cows, and his eldest son was an officer in the Royal Garden Absolute Heavyweight. I cut to the chase and proposed building a brick kiln in the village to fire red bricks to build houses. If it succeeded, the whole village could live in brick and stone houses that feared neither wind nor rain. Gareth's eyes lit up upon hearing this. He immediately summoned the village's strongmen, and dozens of burly brothers followed me, frantically digging clay in the lower reaches of the river valley. Following the structures I had seen in my past life, it took us only 2 days to build a giant updraft kiln. The whole village went shirtless to mold adobe bricks. Once dried, we sealed the kiln and lit the fire. After burning for 2 days and 2 nights, the day we stopped the fire and opened the kiln, Gareth was the first to rush in. When the heat wave dissipated, he ran out with a glowing red face, holding 2 bright red bricks. Striking them together, the sound was incredibly crisp. The kingdom's first batch of modern red bricks was successfully fired. The whole village boiled over, and 3 more kilns were built in succession. Red bricks poured out continuously. I immediately brought out the blueprints for the 300 square meter grand manor I had drawn up long ago and prepared to break ground. But you can't build a brick house with just red bricks. You also need cement. I told Gareth I needed a massive amount of limestone. Gareth frowned, pondered for a moment, and then slammed his hand down, saying, "Head, take care of it." Early the next morning, this usually low-profile old village chief changed into a crisp black surcoat, mounted his old horse, and headed straight for London City. He traveled along the King's Road, heading straight for the gates of the Royal Red Keep. Facing the interrogation of the heavily armored royal guards wielding halberds, Gareth's expression didn't change. He unhurriedly pulled a golden signet ring from his breast pocket. Seeing the lion crest on the signet ring clearly, the guards' faces instantly changed. Stuttering, they said, "Old sir, this is the private seal of the abdicated old king. The current King Edward has just ascended the throne. I don't know if this ring is still valid today. Please don't move. I will immediately go to the inner court to report." My village chief, Uncle Gareth, holding the old king's personal guard seal, directly scared the wits out of the Red Keep guards. Once the current King Edward learned of this, he went with the flow and withdrew the inner court guards who were keeping the old King Henry under house arrest. As soon as Gareth entered the inner court and saw the down-and-out old King Henry, he directly pulled out the popcorn balls I made. Old Henry ate them with a crunch, his eyes shining. Hearing Gareth talk about how I lifted the whole village out of poverty and fired red bricks that benefited the commoners, he thought of me as as a heavenly genius. He immediately decided to personally go find his son Edward to help me get limestone to build a big house. On King Edward's side, he was just discussing with his prime minister about issuing a decree of granting titles for miraculous deeds, announcing that whoever could solve the people's livelihood problems would be granted a noble title. Hearing his father say that I used yellow mud to fire sturdy red bricks and could use limestone to make cement, Edward slapped his thigh in excitement. This was a miraculous deed that could allow all the people in the world to withstand the bitter cold. He decided on the spot that once verified, I must be heavily rewarded. Old Henry also used this opportunity to demand the right to freely leave the palace for incognito visits. Meanwhile, I was taking the village veteran Bruce, driving a carriage to London City for a major shopping trip. With money in hand, I directly spent a massive sum of 17 silver coins to buy a top-quality black walnut wood cane, making Bruce's heart ache so much he cursed me for being a spendthrift. At noon, we passed by the Royal Gardens, where a high-end aristocratic poetry gathering was taking place. Bruce, this country bumpkin, stared at the top-tier noble beauties in the pavilion, gulping wildly. His lecherous gaze directly provoked Lady Eleanor, the daughter of the Duke of Lancaster, and Princess Isabella, King Edward's eldest daughter. The two noble young ladies rushed out aggressively. Lady Eleanor showed no mercy, viciously lashing her riding crop onto my shoulder, cursing us as peeping hooligans and rogues. My shoulder burned with pain, but I didn't lose my temper. Instead, amidst Bruce's curses, I slowly stood up, picked up my cane, and said in a gentle, highly apologetic tone, I am sorry, two noble ladies. I shouldn't have faced you. It's truly because I am blind and cannot see. I've caused you trouble. I'm sorry. After saying that, I tapped the ground with my cane and stumbled away. That's right, this move is called destroying the spirit. The spectating nobles and commoners instantly blew up, criticizing the two ladies for being unreasonable and bullying a poor blind man. Eleanor and Isabella looked at my hazy eyes. Their minds went blank instantly, their faces turning deathly pale. How important is reputation to medieval noblewomen? They had beaten a blind man indiscriminately, and a sense of guilt instantly swallowed them. Eleanor covered her face and broke down crying. I'm so awful. Princess Isabella burst into tears even more wildly, chasing out to apologize but couldn't find me, clutching her chest and crying bitterly. This single wave directly left the two ladies depressed, hiding at home washing their faces with tears every day, causing their two old fathers, the Duke and the King, so much worry their hair almost turned white. To prevent being hit by blind fools in the future, I bought a purebred tall horse, various spices, and conveniently tore a 3-finger-wide piece of black silk to blindfold my eyes. Blindfolded with black cloth, my aura instantly became mysterious and unfathomable. That night, Alara nestled in my arms, feeling distressed over my lavish spending during the day. Holding her, I only felt that this sense of security couldn't be traded for 1,000 gold. Early the next morning, a miracle occurred. I opened my eyes and found that my mind's eye ability had actually evolved. The originally black and white 3D perception world had turned into full color, and the range had expanded to 50 meters. Turning to look at Alara beside me, I almost got a nosebleed in the vision of my mind's eye. This girl was simply a flawless, supreme stunner. Not only that, my physical fitness skyrocketed, granting me the terrifying strength of 7 or 8 grown men. In a great mood, I personally went to the kitchen to knead dough. Bringing out the expensive refined salt, I pan-fried a few soft egg pancakes for her. Watching my skillful movements and eating the delicacies she wouldn't have dared dream of before, Alara was so moved tears fell pat-pat, swearing to serve me well in the future. At this time, the abdicated old King Henry, bringing 4 royal knights and using the alias Old Harry, quietly came to our Oakhaven village for an incognito visit. Wandering around the village with his hands behind his back, he happened to see me directing the strongmen building the manor. To prevent them from inhaling limestone powder, I had everyone wear homemade linen masks. This advanced awareness of protection opened Old Harry's eyes. At noon, I had Alara buy over 100 pounds of pork, preparing to feast the whole village. Medieval pork was considered peasant meat, something nobles completely disdained. But I chopped the pork into chunks, blanched it, added spices like cinnamon and star anise, caramelized the sugar, and stewed it for a full 2 hours. The moment I opened the pot, the rich meat aroma was like a nuclear explosion, instantly sweeping across the village. I had someone bake 1,000-layer flatbreads, scooped out the steaming braised pork, chopped it up, and stuffed it into the bread. One bite, and it was rich but not greasy, mouth-watering. The men of the village ate until their eyes turned red. One guy devoured 12 in one sitting. The grand old King Henry was also completely conquered by this dimension-lowering gourmet food. With no regard for his image, he squatted in a corner against the dirt wall, a pulled pork wrap in each hand, eating until his mouth was covered in grease, sighing repeatedly that I could turn the rotten into the magical. Just as the whole village was reveling, over a dozen heavily armored cavalrymen suddenly rushed in at the village entrance. A royal attendant shouted at the top of his lungs, "Arthur, receive the decree." The entire venue went dead silent. The attendant unrolled the parchment scroll and read aloud. Because of my meritorious service in firing bricks, benefiting the country and the people, King Edward directly titled me Baron of Oakhaven, rewarded me with 100 gold pieces, and granted me the tax collection rights of 3 nearby villages as my fiefdom. Boom! The whole village completely boiled over. It was extremely difficult to be granted a noble title in the kingdom, and commoners had absolutely no chance. Yet I, a blind man, had ascended to the heavens in a single step to become a noble baron. Alara, holding a meat wrap with only 1 bite taken, was was completely dumbfounded. From an emaciated peasant girl who was almost beaten and starved to death, she transformed into a baroness of the kingdom. Even a bard wouldn't dare make up a story with such a huge leap. I calmly accepted the decree and conveniently slipped the attendant 2 5-shilling silver coins as a tip. Seeing that I was genuinely blindfolded with black cloth, the attendant awkwardly accepted the silver and left a few royal craftsmen behind to learn the brick-firing technique. The aroma of the meat not only made the old king cry with craving, but also attracted over a dozen poor kids from the neighboring village who couldn't even afford linen clothes. A little girl held the meat wrap I gave her without eating it, saying she wanted to save it for her grandmother who had starved for 2 days. My heart felt a pang of sorrow. I directly ordered 2 meat wraps for each child, plus 20 copper coins, ordering their parents to use it to buy clothes. This scene deeply pierced old Harry. With red eyes, he secretly tossed village chief Gareth 2 large gold ingots, telling him to buy grain and cloth for those veterans and children who couldn't survive. Early the next morning, Elara took grain and the 2 bags of money I forced on her as a betrothal gift, returning to her maiden home in glory to show off. Just as I finished groping around to boil some oatmeal, the thick-skinned old Harry brought his royal knights to my thatched hut to crash my breakfast again. Seeing that a baron like me was still living in a drafty rundown house, old Harry blew his beard in anger. Snatching a gold sovereign from a knight's hand, he threw it directly at me as meal money and a housing subsidy. As soon as he threw it, he regretted it, afraid he might smash a blind man like me to death. But the next second, not only did I not dodge, I casually raised my hand. Smack! I caught the gold coin firmly midair with one hand, casually saying, then it would be impolite to refuse. This move directly scared the cold sweat out of the 4 royal knights behind old Harry. They stared dead at me, a thought simultaneously popping into their minds. Locating by sound? This blind man is an unparalleled master. The knight captain didn't believe it. While I was making pancakes, he drew his dagger and waved it left and right in front of my eyes, even doing a fierce straight thrust to test me. If I hadn't been wearing the black cloth, I would have been exposed long ago. I feigned calm, continued cooking, and forcibly maintained my act as a blind man. After eating, old Harry left, but the knight captain still didn't give up. He ran back, grabbed me by the collar, and warned me not to call the old king old Harry. To establish his dominance, he pointed at a bowl-thick wooden stump on the ground and kicked it fiercely. With a crack, the stump broke. After showing off, he sneered, turned, and left. But what he didn't know was that, in my full-color mind's eye world, I clearly saw this idiot walk to a secluded spot, sweating profusely from the pain. Taking off his leather boot, his instep was swollen like a huge steamed bun. I almost laughed out loud. Why bother, suffering just to save face? However, this incident also served as a reminder. In this dog-eat-dog medieval kingdom, without a self-defense weapon, I would sooner or later become a punching bag. I carried the 100 refined steel I bought and directly felt my way to the village blacksmith shop. The temperature of the blacksmith's charcoal furnace wasn't high enough at all. Without a word, I drew a blueprint and built a large bellows. With a pull of the bellows, the furnace temperature soared. Over the next half-month, I stayed indoors, hammering it 1,000 times to forge out all the impurities in the steel. Using the special Damascus steel techniques of folding and twisting, I forged a chillingly sharp, handleless blade. I found a bowl-thick wooden stump to test the blade. With one slash, the stump was split evenly, and the blade didn't curl in the slightest. An absolute divine weapon. Finally, I took out that black walnut wood I bought for 17 silver coins and perfectly embedded the blade into it. Normally, it was just an ordinary cane, but upon encountering danger, drawing it revealed a deadly blade that could slice through iron like mud. The kingdom's first concealed sword cane was officially born. Under my painstaking management, Oakhaven village changed every day. Not only did my grand red brick manor rise from the ground, the exterior walls plastered with cement, but even the interior was paved with high-quality oak flooring. The wooden panels on the walls were carved with exquisite iris patterns. Just for the interior decoration, I threw in hundreds of silver coins. Elara, this little money grubber, her greatest joy every day was sitting in the house, hugging my stash of 700 or 800 silver coins, grinning from ear to ear as she counted the money. One day, village chief Sir Gareth led 2 elderly men into my manor. As soon as these 2 old men saw the interior of my mansion, their eyes glazed over. Gareth sighed, pointing at the 2, saying this was One-Eyed Marcus from Grizzly Valley, and the veteran Quickblade Daniel from Cold Spring Village. They were old brothers who had braved life and death with him in the army back in the day. Their 2 villages were so poor they were clinking. The serfs were almost starving to death. They wanted to beg me for a way out, asking if they could also join the popcorn ball business. Grizzly Valley and Cold Spring Village were now also fiefs granted to me by the king. I shook my head and decisively refused. The popcorn ball market was almost saturated. If we did more, no one would have food to eat. Seeing the disappointed looks in the 2 old men's eyes, I changed the subject and threw out an even bigger plan. Merge our 3 villages and manage them centrally. Draft all the men to fire bricks and build houses. They'll provide 3 meals a day, aiming to have everyone living in brand new, cold-resistant brick houses within a month. Hearing this, the 2 old men were so excited they almost knelt down to kiss my ring. I then dropped another bombshell. Also, I hear there are quite a few retired veterans in the villages. I plan to recruit 50 strong household guards, paying each man a military wage of 1 silver coin per month. 1 silver coin, that was a common serf's harvest for a whole year. Marcus and veteran Daniel's eyes instantly lit up like starving wolves, shouting at the top of their their lungs that they wanted to be my guards. I sized up their half-century-old arms and legs with some suspicion, asking if they could still fight. As soon as my voice fell, old Daniel directly picked up a thick wooden stick in the courtyard and started wielding it on the spot. Good heavens, the sound of breaking air whistled. The moves were grand yet meticulous, every strike aiming straight for the vitals. It was absolutely a killing technique survived from the meat grinder battlefields of the Middle Ages. At the end of his routine, the old man actually leaped up and landed lightly and steadily on top of the 3-meter-high stable. I was dumbfounded. How is this a retired old man? This was clearly a hidden Templar knight-level master. I made the decision to recruit him on the spot without a second word. The next day, with a stroke of my pen, I withdrew 600 silver coins and had Gareth go to London City to buy 50 high-breed warhorses. Alara, hugging her severely shrunken money bag, slumped on a small wooden stool, crying in heartbreak, complaining resentfully that I spent our entire fortune in one day. I pulled her into my arms, unceremoniously occupying that soft high ground, and smiled to comfort her that money is a bastard, spend it all and well earn it back. In this chaotic Middle Ages, with our family being so rich, if we didn't have armed forces to protect us, we'd be robbed clean by bandits and rogue knights sooner or later. Recruiting guards is money to save our lives. 50 battle-hardened veterans quickly assembled. To intimidate these army hooligans, I specifically arranged for a ruthless man named Blackbeard Blake to play the bad cop. It was said this Blackheart fellow used to hollow out Viking pirate skulls to use as wine bowls on the northern battlefield, known as the living king of hell. He glared, releasing killing intent, and declared, "The Baron has given us houses to live in and a way to survive. If anyone dares to bite the hand that feeds us, he'll personally skin him alive." As soon as his voice fell, a man with a hideous scar on his face stepped forward, sneering in agreement. His lordship's kindness to us is heavy as a mountain. If anyone dares to betray him, Blake won't need to do it. He'll slit my own throat first. With this combination of grace and might, the 50 battle veterans were disciplined into total submission. As more manors were built, the working men put in desperate effort. But once summer arrived, these shirtless medieval men reeked of sweat. Their hair was so greasy you could squeeze oil out of it, and their heads crawled with fleas and lice. My enhanced sense of smell simply couldn't take it. I felt nauseous from meters away. I immediately gathered the whole village, stood in the square, and laid down an iron rule. Oak Haven is a civilized place. From today on, after finishing work every day, you must wash your clothes and take a bath. You must wash your hands before meals. If anyone dares to relieve themselves anywhere again, they'll have old Daniel cut off his family jewels and feed them to the dogs. The men felt a chill in their crotches and fearfully clamped their legs together. Under the iron rule, the village's ethos instantly changed. Even people from outside villages looking for work weren't allowed in if they weren't washed clean. Once the manor was completed, I moved the workshop into the courtyard. During my free time, thinking of the fierce swordplay old Daniel displayed that day, I drew the sword from my cane and gestured a few times based on memory. At this very moment, a miracle happened. The full-color mind's eye in my brain actually acted like an activated supercomputer, automatically replaying the video of Daniel's swordplay, continuously deducing, disassembling, and reassembling it. It actually eliminated all the flaws in this sword technique, optimizing it to a flawless realm. I was ecstatic and immediately practiced hard according to the optimized moves. This sword technique combined Eastern quick-draw arts with Western fencing, emphasizing speed, accuracy, and ruthlessness. It only attacked, never defended. Once the sword was drawn, it must take a life. In just 3 days, I completely mastered the essence of this killing technique. In passing, I also started frantically practicing the extremely deadly swift draw technique, madly drawing and sheathing the sword 500 times a day, building thick calluses on my hands layer by layer. One day, the poorest girl in the village, Maggie, suddenly knelt outside my door, knocking her head bang bang, crying and begging me to lend her some silver to see a doctor for her mother. Without a word, I took 10 silver coins and had someone drive her mother to London to find the top doctors. Unfortunately, the old woman had contracted a foul disease in the red light district of the royal city in her youth, and now she was terminally ill. Even a god couldn't save her. In the middle of the night before her passing, the old woman called Maggie to her bedside, insisting on imparting all the secret skills of serving men she learned as a tavern prostitute. Maggie blushed crimson, her eyes widening in shock as she exclaimed, "You can do it like that? I could never do it." Early the next morning, the old woman hung herself. I paid to arrange a fine oak coffin for Maggie's burial. After returning from the burial, Maggie pulled out a blood-stamped serf's indenture contract from her breast, knelt on the ground sobbing, saying she couldn't repay my kindness and was selling herself to me as a slave, asking only for a bite to eat. I snatched the contract and, without even looking at it, tore it to shreds. I told her the house didn't lack slaves, but we were exactly short of a cook. If she was willing, she could stay here and cook. Maggie was so moved she was incoherent. I took the opportunity to teach her some modern cooking techniques. She was extremely talented and soon became my family's personal master chef. With the big house built and the thatched hut torn down, privacy was finally guaranteed. Having been a monk for over 2 months, I finally welcomed the blooming of spring. In the dead of night, I pulled El Arajo had just taken a rose essential oil bath and exuded a faint fragrance into the high-end velvet bedding. She blushed scarlet, trembling as she begged me to blow out the candle. I patted her in exasperation, saying, "Your husband is a blind man. Is there a difference between lights off and lights on?" She froze, then obediently stopped struggling. That night of rolling in the clouds and rain, I completely bid farewell to my monk's life. Early the next morning, village chief Gareth led old Harry, 2 old men, and a chubby 7 or 8-year-old boy, coming to my house with faces full of joy for a housewarming. As soon as old Harry entered, he impatiently had someone boil the top-tier noble tea he brought. Medieval tea boiling meant crushing the tea leaves and throwing them into a pot with scallions, ginger, garlic, pepper, and salt in a chaotic stew. I took a sip, and the weird taste filling my mouth almost made me spit it out on the spot. I mocked him unceremoniously. "Old Harry, this garbage of yours, if I fed it to my horses, even the horses wouldn't drink it. Tomorrow I'll let you taste what real tea is." Old Harry blew his beard and glared, cursing me for not knowing a good thing. Just then, the little fatty beside him stared eagerly at my family's freshly fried pork cutlets, drooling. I looked with my mind's eye. This little doll was round and very lovable. Old Harry rubbed the little fatty's head and called him Little Fat Bear Richard. Wait, Richard, the current king's most favored second son, Prince Richard, wasn't his nickname Little Fat Bear? And he called old Harry grandfather. My mind went boom. Then this old Harry, wasn't he the abdicated old King Henry? Then the two old men beside him were absolutely the cabinet prime minister Duke William and the Chief Justice Thomas. My heart trembled violently, but on the surface, I was as steady as an old dog. Pretending I knew nothing, I handed Richard a piece of meat cutlet. Little Richard ate until his mouth was covered in grease, saying innocently that since I treated him to delicious food, he would go back and have his father find the archbishop to cure my eyes. I sighed and said with feigned profundity, "Being unable to see actually brings peace. Besides, your little Richard has a kind heart. As the saying goes, man is born with a soul of pure light. It is the ways of the world that cast shadows." As soon as these words fell, old King Henry, Prime Minister William, and Chief Justice Thomas, the three old men were instantly struck as if by lightning and stood up abruptly. Thomas excitedly bowed to me with his hand over his heart, begging me to finish reciting. I casually recited a modified version of Western philosophical maxims. The rhythm, full of the great Tao of enlightenment, left these three big shots absolutely mesmerized. Henry excitedly asked me who wrote it. I started talking nonsense. I was hunting in the snowy mountains of the Highlands, and I met an immortal old man who taught me. Before he left, he chanted, "In the silver city above the clouds, an angel stroked the crown of my head, granting me the breath of eternal life, and then a flash of white light blinded me." Silver City? The old king and the prime minister gasped, trembling with excitement. That was the location of the legendary paradise realm, Elysium. Henry slapped his thigh in jealousy, cursing me for wasting a heavenly treasure and missing out on the deity's immortality technique. Rolling his eyes, he grabbed Prince Little Richard and forced the current prince to take me as his master to learn the deity's abilities. He even threatened that if I didn't accept, he would cut off my limestone supply. My heart blossomed with joy. I reluctantly accepted the prince's apprenticeship vow, successfully taking the current royal prince as my disciple. After old Harry and the group left, I immediately set up the large iron wok, poured in the raw tea leaves I just bought, and stir-fried them over low heat. Before long, a rich, fresh tea aroma filled the entire courtyard. 2.5 pounds of roasted tea came out of the pot. Smelling the aroma, Alara's eyes were filled with worship for me. Just then, someone leaped down from the courtyard wall with a whoosh. It was Lancelot, the commander of the old king's personal royal knights. Because I had scolded the old king for flaunting his seniority during the day, this old boy was extremely unhappy and climbed the wall behind his master's back to make trouble for me. He approached step by step with a dark face, cracking his armored knuckles. Seeing this, Alara and Maggie, one holding a boning knife and the other a fire poker, guarded me firmly. Alara was so scared her legs went soft, but she still gritted her teeth and tremblingly warned him not to come closer. My heart warmed, and I softly told them to step back. Lancelot sneered, asking if I really thought he wouldn't dare strike. Saying so, he lunged forward violently. At the exact moment he made his move, my face was expressionless, and my right hand instantly pressed onto my cane. Clang! A blinding silver light tore through the air. The swift draw technique I had painstakingly practiced 1,000 times erupted perfectly in this instant. The sword speed reached an unimaginable extreme. Before Lancelot even had the thought to dodge, my iron-slicing sword cane was already resting steadily against his throat, a tiny trace of blood slowly seeping out. The air went dead silent instantly. Lancelot froze in place, his pupils shrinking violently, his gaze shifting from arrogance to extreme terror as cold sweat instantly drenched his entire body. He watched with his own eyes as a lock of his blonde hair was severed by the sword aura. If my wrist pushed forward even 1 millimeter, his fine head would roll to the ground. I sheathed the sword back into the cane, my tone icy cold, telling him to scramble back and tell his lord not to test my bottom line again. This insufferably arrogant royal knight commander swallowed hard, his legs giving out, and crawled and scrambled out of my house. After returning, he warned his royal guards in sheer terror, saying that blind man was an unparalleled sword master. If he hadn't shown mercy, Lancelot would already be a dead man, and from now on, no one was allowed to provoke me. At dusk, old King Henry ran over again like an old dog following a scent. I brewed him a bowl of roasted black tea with boiling water. He took a sip, his eyes instantly lighting up like torches, repeatedly praising it as good tea. This fresh, slightly bitter, pure tea directly overturned his cognition of drinking tea. I deliberately pretended to be troubled, sighing that my family was almost out of food because of building the house, and that I planned to sell this top-tier black tea for 5 gold coins a pound. 5 gold coins a pound. This was practically robbery. But Henry patted his chest and guaranteed that this tea would absolutely absolutely sell out crazily in the noble circles of the royal city. I went with the flow, painfully gifting him a few tins, naturally making him my highest level free royal spokesperson. Once he left satisfied, I told Alara the reason for setting this astronomical price. Nobles spent several gold coins to drink spice-stewed tea for half a year anyway. Spending a few more to buy my premium black tea wouldn't matter to them at all. Alara's eyes shone as she listened. I immediately took out my last stash of 50 silver coins and told her to go to the most prosperous King's Road in London City, secure a shop, and hang up the wooden sign Prosperity Tea Shop. By the way, I instructed her to buy up fresh rose petals in the city. A massive chess game capable of emptying the pockets of the kingdom's powerful elites had been quietly laid out. On the other side, the old king took Richard back to the Red Keep and went straight to King Edward's throne room. He bluffed about what he saw and heard in the village, insisting on leaving the little prince in my village to gain experience, using the excuse of observing the people's conditions. With this grandfather-grandson duo acting as my free protective talismans and ATMs, I had completely established my footing in the kingdom of Albion. As soon as this old boy, the old king, returned to the palace, he showed off big time in front of his son Edward. As soon as he opened the tea tin I gave him, the tea aroma filled the hall. Edward usually drank tea soup stewed with scallions, ginger, and garlic. When had he ever seen such a display? Old Henry haughtily had someone bring boiling water, grabbed a handful of tea leaves, and brewed it directly, disdainfully telling Edward, "Boiled tea is for the lower class to drink. We royalty must steep it." Edward held the golden cup and took a sip. The fresh, sweet aftertaste texture directly made him doubt his life. Seeing his son's country bumpkin appearance, old Henry felt ecstatic. Amidst the joy, Edward sighed, saying there was a severe drought along the northern wall. Tens of thousands of commoners had no harvest, but the national treasury was empty, and there was no money for disaster relief. The little chubby Richard, listening on the side, secretly noted this down, planning to ask me, his newly acknowledged teacher, for a countermeasure. While the old king acted as a free promotional ambassador in the palace, I wasn't idle at home either. Baskets of fresh tea leaves and rose petals were transported into the courtyard, and I worked overtime through the night with the pretty cook Maggie, mixing fresh tea with petals and roasting them. The high-end customized rose black tea and original emerald green tea were born. I worked until the middle of the night. Just after taking a bath and going to bed, a scream and the sound of something heavy hitting the floor suddenly came from the bathroom. I jolted awake, threw on some clothes, grabbed my cane, and rushed over. My full-color minds, I saw everything clearly in the pitch-dark bathroom. Maggie had slipped on the stone floor, scraping a large piece off her knee, bleeding profusely. But my persona right now is a blind man. I could only pretend I couldn't see anything and grope my way over. Maggie was terrified and stubbornly said she was fine, but as soon as she stood up, she fell back down from the pain. I sighed, simply threw away the cane, and scooped her up in a Princess Carrie. A blind man carrying a cripple, a perfect match. To avoid exposing the fact that I could see, I played my acting skills to the extreme along the way. I turned around, bam, hit the wall, turned again, clatter, hit the table. In just a few steps, I bumped and stumbled. In my arms, Maggie felt so heartbroken watching me that her tears swirled. When I got her back to her room, she brought a basin of water and carefully wiped the mud off my feet and the blood smeared on my body. Under the dim candlelight, her affectionate gaze simply couldn't be hidden. I deliberately sighed, mocking myself as a useless blind man. Hearing this, how could Maggie hold back? With a trembling voice, she said, "My lord, Maggie isn't leaving tonight." That night, going with the flow, this obedient cook completely became my woman. Early the next morning, little fatty Richard came to class on time. As soon as he arrived, his eyes shone as he begged me to teach him the immortal magic of flying in the sky. I sized up his round figure and mercilessly poured cold water on him. Flying is possible, but you are too fat. You simply can't fly. From tomorrow on, follow my nights and run early every morning to lose weight. Richard readily agreed. For his first introductory lesson, I directly pulled out an ultimate dimension-lowering weapon, Arabic numerals and decimal addition and subtraction. Little Richard was indeed the king's smartest son. In just an hour, he mastered addition and subtraction up to 1,000 with pure proficiency, exclaiming that the arrangement of numbers was infinitely wondrous. After learning math, he mysteriously asked me if there was a way to solve the drought in the north. Hearing this, I knew he was trying to fish for my ideas to share his father's burden. So I didn't hide anything and casually explained a chain of stratagems to him. Richard listened until his little face flushed red. Bowing repeatedly in excitement, he turned around, mounted his fast horse, and galloped wildly back to London City. As soon as this kid returned to the throne room, it happened to be when the cabinet ministers were deliberating. In front of all the nobles at court, he directly dropped a royal flush. The kingdom's merchants are dripping with oil, filthy rich. Why not levy commercial taxes to fill the treasury? The chancellor of the exchequer immediately pointed out the flaw, saying if everyone went into business, who would farm the land? Richard smugly threw out the patch I taught him. Merchants are not allowed to abandon their fields. Those who leave their fields uncultivated will have their property confiscated by law. If that still doesn't work, then enforce a mandatory grain tax of 20% based on previous grain yields. Those who can't pay go straight to prison. As soon as these words came out, the venue went dead silent. The chancellor excitedly shouted it was brilliant, and his uncle, the Duke of Lancaster, was full of amazement. King Edward was so happy he couldn't find north, decreeing on the spot a heavy reward for Richard's royal tutor. Striking while the iron was hot, Richard volunteered to go to the north for disaster relief, and shamelessly shamelessly begged the king for a blank baron's charter stamped with the royal wax seal. To pave the way for his son, Edward waved his hand and directly approved it. At the same time, an action by the king during the morning court completely detonated my business. To show off, he brewed a bowl of the tea I roasted for every duke and earl attending the court, and specifically mentioned the name Prosperity Tea Shop. Good heavens, the king personally endorsing it, what a big deal. By noon, the originally deserted tea shop instantly had its threshold trampled by high officials and nobles. The kingdom's generals and marquee bosses personally lined up to pay, smashing handfuls of gold coins onto the counter like they were worthless. The 5 gold a pound green tea and 10 gold a pound rose black tea sold out instantly. When Alara drove the carriage back in the evening, she was trembling all over with excitement. In one day, we made a crazy profit of 850 gold coins. This was a massive fortune others couldn't earn in several lifetimes. Seeing her ecstatic, miserly look, I took the opportunity to propose a reward demand. That night, blushing, she fulfilled her promise of absolute obedience to me, and the taste was incredible. Once you have money, you must expand. The next day, I immediately called Village Chief Gareth, telling him to raise wages and build a large workshop in the village. I planned to buy a batch of indentured slaves to set up assembly line tea production, firmly controlling the core technology. Meanwhile, Prince Richard brought his secretly scheming uncle, the Duke of Lancaster, to set up an extremely sinister trap banquet at the Plantagenista Tavern in London City. They invited all the kingdom's biggest grain merchants. The Duke of Lancaster first bluffed crazily, saying His Majesty planned to abolish the lowly merchant class, but the ministers opposed it, and it was Prince Richard who fought against all odds to win everyone a chance. Richard appropriately pulled out that blank baron charter and coldly threw out the reserve price. Whoever can bring out 50,000 bushels of grain to relieve the disaster victims, this hereditary barony is his. Ascending to the nobility depends on today. The grain merchants were all dumbfounded. 50,000 bushels was no small number. Seeing no one speak, Richard made a gesture to leave. Just then, a grain merchant named Hawkins suddenly jumped out, shouting he was willing to offer 80,000. Hearing this, the kingdom's biggest bully tycoon, the greedy Fatty Barry, became anxious and instantly clashed with Hawkins. I offer 100,000. Who dares compete with me? After Hawkins threw some harsh words and left angrily, Fatty Barry got the charter as he wished and happily ran back to gather the grain. Outside the tavern, the Duke of Lancaster gasped in shock at the 100,000 bushels of grain. But Richard sneered and revealed the mystery. It turned out that Fatty Barry was a mega-corrupt official who constantly sucked the blood of commoners, his private wealth thicker than the national treasury, and with a notorious record. Richard had secretly bribed Hawkins the night before to act as a shill, deliberately enraging the Fatty to raise the price. Once the Fatty handed over the grain and relieved the disaster, Richard would turn around and hand over the evidence of Barry persecuting commoners to the Inquisition, not only stripping him of his title but also sending him to the gallows. After hearing this, the Duke of Lancaster looked at his 80-year-old nephew in horror, first using the noble title as bait, then arranging a shill to provoke him, and afterward sharpening the knife to butcher the fat pig. This interlocking venomous plot was simply chilling. Richard even added a naive stab. "Uncle, my teacher taught me all this. Teacher said, you must fatten the pig before killing it." The Duke's mind conjured up the pedantic old face of the tutor, absolutely unable to believe this was a venomous scheme that old scholar could come up with. The disaster relief convoy set off majestically. On the road, Richard kept my instructions in mind, dragging his uncle for a cross-country run before dawn every day. Half a month later, when the two returned to London, the originally chubby little bear had slimmed down considerably, tanned as dark as a commoner. King Edward, seeing his son's appearance in court, felt his heart ache so much he shed tears on the spot, pointing at the court nobles and scolding them for questioning the prince. The Duke of Lancaster stepped forward to deliver his report, excitedly announcing, the northern drought was perfectly resolved. Not only did they not spend a single copper coin or grain from the royal family, but they also squeezed an extra 30,000 bushels of grain from the profiteers to bring back and fill the national treasury. The entire court of nobles was dumbfounded. Edward excitedly pressed to know who came up with the strategy. The Duke cast his gaze toward the royal tutor, Scholar Waldo. The old scholar looked completely bewildered, crossing himself in terror, swearing this was absolutely not his doing. The Duke of Lancaster simply revealed the entire chain of schemes, the catching a white wolf with empty hands and killing the fat pig. Above the grand hall, the sound of ministers gasping could be heard rising and falling. The officials who were just marveling a second ago now completely changed their gaze. The Chief Justice, Sir Sterling, and a group of conservative nobles stepped forward to impeach, warning the king with agonizing heartbreak, "Your Majesty, the person scheming for the prince has such a meticulous mind and such sinister, ruthless methods. The prince is young. Following such a person, what he learns is not the righteous path of a holy knight, but the Machiavellian tactics of a devil. We absolutely cannot let the prince contact this person anymore." The king's original joy was instantly extinguished. His brows locked tightly as he fell into deep hesitation. The Duke of Lancaster also remained silent. Clearly, he too felt that the mastermind behind this was far too dangerous. Meanwhile, eager to share his joy, little Richard had run all the way back to my manor in Oakhaven village in one breath. Before he even entered the house, just by hearing his lighter footsteps, I concluded he had lost weight. Richard excitedly recounted everything that happened in court word for word, waiting for my praise. But I didn't even bat an eyelid. While eating my meat cutlet with a fork, I frowned slightly inside, Richard, you've caused trouble. These methods are too ruthless. Your father and those self-righteous courtiers will definitely think there's a sinister and ruthless schemer behind you, terrified that you'll be corrupted. If I guess correctly, your father is about to issue a decree grounding you, forbidding you from leaving the castle to study. The smile on Richard's face instantly froze, turning pale with fright. Teacher, teach me. I haven't even learned your flying technique yet. If my royal father grounds me, it's all over. I sneered. With me here, what are you panicking about? I immediately called Maggie over and brought out a roll of premium parchment and a quill. Although I pretended to be blind, my mind held the cultural treasures of 5,000 years of China. Unhurriedly, I translated ancient Chinese poetry into majestic Western epic formats and recited them. The sharpest sword is forged in the fiercest flames. The most fragrant rose blooms under the most bitter winter snow. There is only one stairway to the peak of knowledge, and it is called diligence. I told Richard, if your father makes things difficult, throw these truths in their faces. Richard wrote furiously until his wrist ached. Looking at these all-encompassing, peerless essays, he bowed repeatedly in excitement. Richard took the opportunity to eagerly beg me to teach him the flying technique. Finding it troublesome, I casually set up a tripod bracket in the square, tied a long oak pole to a millstone weighing hundreds of pounds, and stepped on it. Using the principle of leverage, the millstone was instantly suspended in the air. I clapped my hands and told him, this is called the power of giants. Seeing that this was all clever tricks using tools and not the godly magic of pulling up mountains he had imagined, Richard's faith collapsed on the spot. He broke down crying, cursed me as a liar, turned around, and ran off to the old king's mansion to complain. Old Harry was drinking tea. Hearing his grandson was bullied, he was instantly furious. But when Richard threw the crumpled parchment on the ground, the old king took one look, and his whole body was struck by lightning. He stood up abruptly, holding the parchment with both hands, his mouth trembling as he read those philosophical epic quotes, his eyes growing brighter with every word. Suddenly, the old king flew into a rage, pointing at Richard and cursing, "You bastard! Which of these pieces taught by Mr. Arthur isn't a masterpiece meant to enlighten the masses and be remembered through the ages? He showed you the suffering of the commoners, taught you the skills to defend the kingdom, and you treat it like dirt. If you remain so stubbornly blind, I will directly strip you of your royal inheritance rights." Richard was frightened silly. Without a second word, the old king grabbed a barrel of premium monastery strong ale, grabbed Richard by the ear, and ran to my house to apologize. When they arrived, I was in the courtyard with Maggie doing a Texas BB-style outdoor cookout. The concept of barbecue simply didn't exist in the Middle Ages. Once the aroma of cumin, herbs, and roasted meat wafted out, old King the German's soul was almost hooked away. Richard obediently bowed to me and admitted his mistake. I told him to go to the side, wash his hands, and help Maggie skewer mutton. The old king made himself right at home, grabbing a small stool to sit by the grill to help me fan the flames, while frantically sneaking bites of half-cooked roast meat, shouting in satisfaction. During the meal, the old king asked me why I taught little Richard these immortal masterpieces. I confessed it was to guard against those hypocrites in the court saying I corrupted the prince. Hearing this, the old king slapped his thigh in anger. "I'd like to see who dares. Tomorrow I will personally go to the Red Keep. If anyone dares say a word against you, I'll draw my sword and hack them to pieces." Striking while the iron was hot, I gave him a vivid lesson. "Old Harry, do you know what it truly means to be people-oriented? The king is but a ship, and the people are the ocean. The ocean can bear the ship, but it can also swallow it whole." As soon as these words fell, the old king froze directly in place, a brilliant light shooting from his eyes, so shocked he couldn't speak for a long time. This supreme truth of emperorship, which only wise rulers in their twilight years could comprehend, was thrown out by me ahead of time, with the destructive power of a nuclear blast. Just then, little chubby Richard couldn't eat anymore and casually threw a meat skewer on the ground. I slammed the table and shouted angrily, "Do you not know the poem? Who knows that every grain of food on the silver platter is the bitter sweat dripping from the farmer under the blazing sun?" This Western version of sympathy for the peasants once again left the old king's scalp tingling with shock. Richard shuddered in fear, quickly picked up the meat skewer from the ground, wiped the dust off, and swallowed it in 2 bites. After eating and drinking their fill, the old king got dead drunk and was carried away by the knights. I also feigned drunkenness and lay on the bed. Maggie, this little lass, felt ripples in her heart. Not only did she take off my boots and wipe my body, but she also shyly wanted to offer herself. Using the alcohol as an excuse, I flirted heavily with her, causing her to blush deeply and run away covering her face. I laughed inwardly. This girl wouldn't escape the palm of my hand sooner or later. The next day, I took Maggie in a carriage to London City to inspect the shop. As soon as I arrived at Prosperity Tea Shop on the King's Road, I heard a foreigner yelling and blabbering inside the shop. The Lara and the subordinates couldn't understand him and were sweating profusely with anxiety. I took a look with my mind's eye. It was a Moorish merchant in a silk robe, holding a cheap colored glass bead, smugly showing off to the local nobles watching, saying this was the priceless Oriental treasure dragon's tear, and he wanted to trade it for 500 pounds of my premium black tea. People of the Great Tang. Oh wait, medieval Albion, when had they ever seen glass? My subordinates, the veterans Old Ma and Old Daniel, stared at that broken bead, their eyes glazed over, exclaiming it was invaluable. I was instantly so angered by this foreigner's shamelessness that I laughed. A glass marble worth a few cents in modern society, and you're using it to scam me out of thousands of gold coins worth of tea. Do you really think I'm blind? I approached with a cold face and, using extremely fluent, perfectly pronounced Arabic, threw a national curse right in his face. Immediately after, I delivered a vicious backhand slap. With a crisp smack, 4 or 5 of the foreigner's molars flew right out, and he crashed heavily to the ground. Dead silence filled the room. Alara was bewildered. Old Ma and old Daniel were dumbfounded, and the spectating nobles were dead silent. Who could believe that a country baron not only spoke a foreign language but also dared to beat up a foreign merchant in the street? I raised my cane and whipped at the swindler wildly, roaring in Arabic, "Son of a bitch, daring to bring this trash fired from a pile of sand to scam your granddaddy? Get the hell out." The Moorish merchant was terrified out of his wits, scrambled out of the tea shop, not even daring to fart. Alara was terrified, afraid the foreigner would go to the Supreme Court to sue. I sneered and told her, as long as I exposed the secret that this kind of gemstone is actually just fired sand, the dukes and marquises in the royal city, who were scammed out of tens of thousands of gold coins, would skin these foreign merchants alive. Hearing my explanation, everyone suddenly understood. Old Ma stomped his feet in anger, cursing the foreigners for having black hearts. I waved my hand, stating that the tea business was almost saturated. I planned to buy a large mansion in the city, and our next step was to build a kiln to fire glass ourselves, specifically to scam those filthy rich big shots and foreign envoys. Coincidentally, my subordinates heard that a luxurious family manor in the noble district was up for sale. The seller was none other than the current King Edward's cousin, London City's famous royal relative and ultimate gambler Viscount Percival. This prodigal son had gambled until his eyes turned red in an underground casino, and was about to mortgage the manor, worth at least 30,000 silver coins, to the mob for a mere 10,000. I directly intercepted it with 1,100 gold coins. Seeing the gleaming gold, Percival's eyes shone, and he signed the title deed without hesitation. The underground casino boss, realizing his cooked duck had flown away, flew into a rage. He sent 7 or 8 masked thugs to block us in a deadened alley halfway back, attempting to murder and rob us. Percival turned pale with fright. I sat in the carriage without even moving. My subordinate, the living king of hell, old Daniel, drew his long sword and sneered, robbing a house on the old master's head. He jumped off the carriage, turned the blade, and smashed down viciously with the crossguard. In less than 3 seconds, screams mixed with the sound of crushing bones echoed through the alley. The leader of the mob thugs had his kneecap directly shattered by old Daniel's sword hilt, lying on the ground like a dead dog. Percival was dumbfounded on the spot. He was a royal relative who had seen the world, yet he was so shocked by the terrifying combat power of my 2 coachmen that his scalp went numb. The way he looked at me was full of deep dread. Successfully obtaining the title deed, the noble manor was officially registered under my name. And at this moment, a storm was brewing in the throne room of the Red Keep. King Edward sat squarely on the Iron Throne, his face sinking like water, while the court nobles were filled with righteous indignation. Edward stared at the little Prince Richard, who had just returned from disaster relief, and strictly questioned, "Who exactly taught you that venomous disaster relief scheme?" "The whole court says this person has a wicked heart. If you can't give a clear explanation, you will never be allowed to step out of the Red Keep again." Unhurried, Richard straightened his back and threw out the top secret setting I had taught him. "Father, teacher acts nobly and never seeks fame or wealth. He once encountered a deity who imparted heavenly secrets. Before the old man vanished into white light, he left a sentence. In the silver city above the clouds, an angel stroked the crown of my head, granting me the breath of eternal life. Father, my teacher is the proxy of the deity in the mortal realm." As soon as these words came out, it was like pouring cold water into boiling oil. The grand hall exploded instantly. Edward stood up in shock, and the officials gasped. Just then, old King Henry, who had been listening from behind the curtain, swaggered out holding the parchment I gave him. "Edward, Mr. Arthur calculated long ago that the officials would make things difficult today. Not only is he a man blessed by the deities, but he is also a peerless genius." Old Henry excitedly slapped the parchment onto the armrest of the throne and immediately recited on the spot, "The king is but a ship, and the people are the ocean. The ocean can bear the ship, but it can also swallow it whole." King Edward stared fixedly at the text on the paper. "The sharpest sword is forged in the fiercest flames. There is only one stairway to the peak of knowledge." Every sentence was like a thunderous war drum, shaking this iron-fisted king until his heart surged and his blood boiled. Coupled with the deafening bearing and sinking the ship theory, Edward was completely won over. The court nobles, who were just cursing me as a sinister villain a second ago, were now all fiercely crushed to the ground by my unparalleled talent and grand vision, prostrating themselves in worship. Edward flushed red with excitement, shouting, "This is a true talent to save the world. Men, copy these maxims and distribute them to the world. I will entrust him with heavy responsibilities, and I will grant him an unmatched grand mansion." Coincidentally, the Chancellor suggested that the Percival family's manor in the noble district had been vacant for a long time and was most suitable for a reward. The king's dragon face showed great joy, and he decreed on the spot to grant that grand mansion to this unseen Mr. Arthur. Little did he know, just half an hour ago, that manor had already been bought by me with real silver and gold. Meanwhile, my obedient disciple Richard, keeping in mind a casual remark I made last night, sneaked into the royal kitchen of the Red Keep, crazily sweeping up the top-tier seafood inside to bring me an extra meal. Who would have thought that a dignified prince, to show filial respect to his blind master, would lead people to kick aside the royal steward and rob all 5 large barrels of top-tier lobsters, sea cucumbers, and sturgeons presented as tribute to the king. This is the joy of having a good disciple. Richard patted his chest with heroic pride. "If anything happens, this prince will take the blame." Saying so, he majestically led the guards to transport the seafood out of the palace. On the other side, by the gardens of the Red Keep, Richard's older sister, the Great Tangs, oh wait, the Kingdom of Albion's #1 beauty, Princess Isabella, was painting. When she saw her brother leading people grunting and carrying water buckets, she stopped him out of curiosity. Her gaze accidentally fell on the drawing board held by a retinue member. What was drawn on that board was exactly me. However, the painting only showed my face shape and features, completely missing the eyes. As soon as Isabella saw the portrait, her delicate body trembled, and her eye rims instantly turned red. Just a month ago, she and her cousin misunderstood me and whipped me indiscriminately with a riding crop. Upon learning the truth later, she was so guilty she couldn't eat or sleep for a whole month. Richard, this foolish blockhead, thinking his sister had a secret crush on me, exclaimed, "Sister, could it be that you like Mr. Arthur?" Isabella eagerly asked him why the person in the painting had no eyes. Richard said casually, "Teacher is a blind man. Whenever he goes out, he covers his eyes with black silk, so you didn't draw the eyes." These words were like a bolt from the blue, viciously striking the prince's heart. She remembered that when we met that day, I wasn't blindfolded yet. To prevent further misunderstandings, to prove I was blind, I actually chose to cover my eyes with black cloth from then on to live my days. In her self-imagined scenario, she felt I had endured immense pain and discrimination for their sake. The prince's heart instantly felt like it was being sliced by knives, and she immediately decided to follow Richard out of the city to personally apologize to me in Oakhaven Village. Meanwhile, I was sitting comfortably in the tea shop, playing a game of destroying spirits. This matter had to be blamed on the prodigal son Percival. The king suddenly wanted to check the royal clan's title deeds. His father, the Duke of Cornwall, found the title deed missing and beat him fiercely in a fit of rage. Percival ran to the tea shop like a stray dog, slapping the counter and begging me to return the title deed to him at the original price. Hearing this, how could I let the fat meat already at my mouth fly away? I leaned back in my chair and spoke indifferently. "A deal done is water spilled. You want to buy it? Fine, market price, not a single coin less than 30,000 silver coins." Percival's face turned green with anger, roaring that I was price gouging. I sneered, "If you can't produce the money, get out." If he didn't redeem it, his head would roll, so he could only run back through gritted teeth to get reinforcements. Half an hour later, the Duke of Cornwall, bringing 2 carriages of silver coins, arrived panting at the tea shop. Watching them deliver the money to my door like donkeys at a mill, I directly put on airs. I changed my mind. I'm not selling. To save their lives, the Duke could only suppress his anger, kicked his son out, and humbly begged me for a favor. I postured enough before letting Alara toss the title deed to them. Watching my subordinates load up a full 30,000 silver coins into our carriages, the Duke and his son's eyes turned red with envy. But was I afraid? Because the good show had just begun. The Duke and his son had just returned to their castle with the title deed to report back when the royal herald arrived at my tea shop with the king's decree. You could never guess what earth-shattering thing King Edward had done. He decreed directly granting that noble manor to me. The absolute best part was that when the herald read the decree, the Duke of Cornwall and Percival happened to be following right behind, witnessing all of this with their own eyes. When they heard specially reward 1 noble manor, the Duke and his son petrified on the spot, standing there dumbfounded like they had been struck by lightning. The house they had just spent 30,000 in blood capital to redeem from my hands a moment ago was handed back to me as a prize by the king the next moment. This meant I spent 0 money. The house was still mine, and I had reverse earned 19,000 silver coins from the Duke's family. Alara was holding back her laughter so hard tears came out. After cleaning up this wave of low-level mobs, I took my wife back to the country manor. As soon as I got home, a joyous event exploded that shook my heart. Alara was pregnant. Not only was my wife kind, but she was also extremely protective of her husband. Thinking that with her pregnancy and needing to nourish her body, she was afraid of suffocating me. So she actually secretly worked on the cook Maggie's mindset, wanting to take Maggie as my personal companion concubine. Maggie had already secretly given her heart to me, so she agreed blushing. Just as I was thinking about this, Richard brought his seafood transport brigade rushing into the courtyard, and the one following behind him was exactly Princess Isabella. As soon as the princess entered the courtyard, she came before me nervously and apprehensively, lifting her skirt in a deep curtsy. "Mr. Arthur, it was my fault that day. I didn't know you could not see. I am full of guilt for the harm I caused you, and I came specially to apologize." My wife Alara's fur instantly bristled, questioning coldly, "So the whip mark on my husband's shoulder was lashed by you?" The princess quickly explained it was her cousin who did it. Hearing that every debt has its debtor, Alara's anger subsided. Seeing the princess come all this way to admit her mistake, I generously waved my hand. "A visitor is a guest. Sit down and eat." I cooked personally, making garlic butter, roasted lobster, and pan-fried sea cucumber. In this Middle Ages where everything was either boiled or haphazardly roasted, my cooking skills were a dimensional strike. Initially, Isabella still minded her royal etiquette, but after a few bites, she completely let herself go, actually eating so much she let out a loud burp in public. The dignified princess blushed deeply. I teased her with a smile, and looking at our joyous and harmonious family atmosphere, a deep envy showed in the princess' eyes. After the meal, I took a bucket to water my experimental field. Planted in this garden were high-tech potatoes, corn, and tomatoes that could rid the kingdom of famine in the future. The princess came over curiously, and I casually replied, "Do me a favor, water each hole a little." Dead silence. The royal maids glared angrily, thinking I actually dared to make someone of the golden branch and jade leaves do heavy labor. But the princess carefully helped me water, terrified of damaging these peculiar new crops. Before leaving, she specifically walked up to me and invited me to attend the midsummer poetry gathering held in the royal gardens 3 days later. On the 15th of April, the weather was clear. I took 2 guards and went to the royal gardens. The place was bustling with people. Various noble talents and beauties gathered in one hall. I was dressed in a black tailored formal suit, my eyes blindfolded with black satin, holding my cane, grasping that aura perfectly. This poetry gathering was hosted by the kingdom's chief archmaester, Alistair. The prize was, whoever could win the poetry laureate today would not only enter the Privy Council but could also marry his legitimate daughter as a wife. Just then, a harsh, mocking voice came from the side. An arrogant noble youth looked at me with disdain. A blind man dares to dream of winning the poetry laureate? You can't even see what flowers, grass, and trees look like. How can you write poetry? This person was exactly the kingdom's famous king of cuckolds, whose wife had cheated on him countless times behind his back, Lord Tristan. I unhurriedly stood up, cupped my hands, and smiled. So it is the famously renowned Lord Tristan. I have long admired that lush green prairie atop your head. Pardon my disrespect. As soon as these words came out, the nobles around who knew the truth trembled from holding back their laughter. Tristan actually thought I was praising his rich and fertile fiefdom. He smugly flicked his sleeves and walked away. The competition officially began. The topic was to praise the winter rose. Just as I was about to have my subordinate bite the bullet and write on my behalf, Princess Isabella and the Duke of Lancaster's daughter finally pushed through the crowd and found me. They bowed deeply in remorse and apology, and I waved my hand casually, considering the matter closed. Seeing that I didn't bring a quill, the princess smiled slightly and took the initiative to propose. Mr. Arthur, how about I write on your behalf? The princess held the pen with her jade-like hand, leaned over, her beautiful eyes flowing with grace, and asked softly, "Teacher, I am ready." The gaze of the entire venue instantly focused on this blind baron and the stunningly beautiful princess. Without even thinking, I turned on my cheat and threw out the peerless English rhythmic poem Plum Blossom. By the ruined wall, a single winter rose blooms, standing alone against the freezing dunes. From afar, you might mistake it for the snow, were it not for the sweet scent the bitter winds blow. When the last line fell, the noisy royal gardens instantly became dead silent. Everyone stared fixedly at the verses on the paper, gasping in cold air. This so-called blind man threw out a King Bomb-level, world-renowned epic the moment he opened his mouth. In this poetry gathering, how could that idiot Tristan ever hope to win? Who would have thought that at the highest-tier midsummer bard gathering of the Kingdom of Albion, a blind man wearing a black silk blindfold would absolutely crush the competition and become the center of attention. Not only that, but Lady Eleanor, the daughter of the scheming Duke of Lancaster, even took the initiative to approach me and act as my personal scribe. Just moments ago, during the first round of assessments, I casually recited a poem praising the winter rose. Relying on my astonishing talent, I made the examiner, Royal Court Archbishop Cedric, nod repeatedly, easily securing my spot in the next round. But the moment the prompt for the second round was announced, all 319 young talents who had advanced were dumbfounded. Chief Examiner Cedric announced from his high vantage point, "The topic for the second round remains the winter rose, but the poem must absolutely not contain the words rose or briar. You have the time it takes for 2 candles to burn out." These words were like a basin of cold water poured over everyone's heads. The crowd instantly exploded into an uproar. Everyone was scratching their heads and sighing in despair. How could you write a hymn of praise without mentioning the rose? Wasn't this deliberately making things difficult? Hearing this, I just laughed. This is supposed to be hard? I turned to Eleanor beside me and said indifferently, "Let's go. Time to write." Eleanor's little face flushed with excitement. Obediently, she unrolled the parchment, took up her quill with her delicate hand, and looked up at me expectantly. Without even needing to draft it in my head, I recited directly, "Born in the woods of ice and snow, mingling not with the mundane blooms of spring. In a single night, its fragrance bursts forth, turning 10,000 miles of royal earth into an endless spring." As soon as this poem was spoken, Eleanor's hand trembled violently, her face full of shock. Not only did this winter rose poem fail to mention half a flower name, but it also captured the proud, unyielding spine of the winter flower to absolute perfection. But right at this moment, those noble young masters nearby who had racked their brains and still couldn't write anything turned sour with jealousy. Good heavens, this was actually composed by a blind man? Why is the daughter of the Duke of Lancaster personally writing for a blind man? He can't even see. How can he compose poetry? He probably plagiarized it. Hearing these insults, I remained as steady as a mountain, but Eleanor completely blew her top. With a face as cold as frost, she rushed over, pointed at the group of men, and scolded them. "What do you know? Even if Sir Arthur cannot see now, does that mean he has never seen before? You are worse than a blind man. What are you so jealous about? Sir Arthur is a peerless talent who knows that the grand feast on the plate. Every bite is the blood and sweat of the serfs. What is composing a mere hymn to him? If you dare slander Sir Arthur again, this lady will throw you into the king's swan lake to feed the fish." With Eleanor's shout, the entire venue fell dead silent. What? He is Arthur, the Baron of Oak Valley who wrote the Song of the Serfs and received a royal charter? The people who were mocking me a second ago now looked like they wanted to throw themselves at my feet and kiss my boots. Over a dozen young talents surrounded me, their faces flushed with excitement, frantically begging me to take them as disciples. But I decisively refused. Teaching and educating others was someone else's business. Right now, I just wanted to earn more gold sovereigns and take in a few more bedchamber maids to spread my lineage. Meanwhile, high up in the tower stands, the current iron-fisted King Edward, the Duke of Lancaster, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Duke William, were gazing down at the pavilion. When the Duke of Lancaster saw his precious daughter actually acting as a scribe for a blind man, His expression turned incredibly ugly, terrified she might have met some scoundrel. King Edward, however, waved his hand, indicating they should wait and see how things develop. I smoothly advanced to the third round, where the topic became even harder, a knight's grand ambition. Just as I was conceptualizing my poem, Lord Tristan, the son of the Chancellor of the Exchequer, came over with a lackey named Simon. Simon mocked me in a passive-aggressive tone. So what if a blind man wins the bard's laurel crown? Do you think the kingdom's chief scholar Alastair would ever marry his granddaughter to you? Tristan was also full of disdain, arrogantly declaring that today's laurel crown belonged to him alone. Eleanor's eyes grew red with anger, and she cursed them on the spot for being shameless. I patted the back of her hand and said indifferently, "If a mad dog bites you, just ignore it. Are you gonna bite it back?" Tristan gnashed his teeth in anger. After throwing down some harsh words, he left, while Simon stayed behind, continuing to fan the flames. Outwardly, I remained expressionless. I lifted my concealed sword cane and struck it hard against the stone steps, knocking loose a few pieces of gravel. I casually picked up a piece of gravel, and using my mind's eye holographic radar senses to pinpoint his location by sound, I flicked my fingers and shot it out with explosive force. Not far away, Simon suddenly fell to the ground, screaming miserably. That piece of gravel had struck true, smashing directly into his ankle bone like a lead musket ball. His face twisted in agony as he pointed at me and roared viciously, "It was you, you dead blind man. You must have hit me with a rock." I spread my hands and sneered, "You can eat whatever garbage you want, but you can't spout garbage. I am a blind man. Do you really think I have the ability to aim that accurately?" The surrounding crowd nodded in deep agreement. How could a blind man injure someone with a hidden weapon? Simon could only swallow his bad luck and limp away. I took the opportunity to order my subordinates to secretly keep an eye on him. My intuition told me this guy was being instructed by someone behind the scenes. After dealing with that little punk, I turned and recited my poem for the third round. Why don't men draw their golden swords and reclaim the lost lands of the northern wall? Pray, engrave your name in the Hall of Heroes. No frail scholar has ever been dubbed a marquis. As soon as this poem came out, the way Eleanor looked at me was practically dripping with honey. Even Examiner Archbishop Cedric flushed with excitement, exclaiming that if all the sons of Albion had such ambition, driving the Viking barbarians out of the north would happen in no time. Without any suspense, I charged into the final round once again. The topic for the final round was determination of loyalty to the king. The examiner was none other than the kingdom's current chief scholar, Alastair. But the look this old man gave me was full of disgust and disappointment. I knew what he was thinking. He prided himself on his scholarly lineage. How could he bear to marry his precious granddaughter to a blind man like me? I didn't care what he thought. Since I had to write about serving the country, I was going to give them something truly shocking. I tapped my cane, and my chilling, battle-hardened voice echoed through the pavilion. Drunk, I trimmed the lamp and wiped my long sword, dreaming of the sounding horns across the encampment. My brave warriors share the roasted meat, while the harp plays the song of the frontier. A grand autumn muster on the battlefield. War horses sprint like lightning. Bowstrings sound like thunder splitting the sky. To fulfill the king's grand design and win a name both in life and in death. Pity these broken eyes of mine. The entire venue fell dead silent. Everyone felt goosebumps erupting all over their bodies. Even Cedric exclaimed, "Grand scholar, there is a chilling, murderous aura in this poem. What is a dimensional strike? This is a dimensional strike." The other young talents competing against me didn't even have the courage to put pen to paper. They sighed and conceded defeat on the spot. Tristan, who had written half a poem, irritably crumpled his parchment into a ball, looking at me with extreme jealousy. In everyone's eyes, I was the undisputed Laurel Crown bard. But right at this moment, Alastair stood up and shamelessly announced, "Today's Laurel Crown goes to Bartholomew's vast sky." The moment he said this, the crowd was in an uproar. Even Cedric couldn't stand it anymore and whispered, begging him not to show blatant favoritism. But the old man was dead set on it, finding an incredibly absurd excuse. What Arthur wrote is not a classical rhythmic poem, but a Western freeverse format with long and short lines, so he cannot be awarded the Laurel Crown. Even the guy named Bartholomew felt unworthy and didn't dare accept the title. Eleanor stomped her feet in anger, erupting on the spot and angrily cursing the gathering as unfair bullshit. But I smiled and stopped her. The so-called Laurel Crown is nothing but a joke. Just treat it as a source of amusement. Lady Eleanor, thank you for writing for me today. Farewell. Saying that, I turned around and walked away. Just as I stepped out of the pavilion, I channeled internal energy into my voice and let out a long, resounding laugh. Should the great dragon one day ride the wind, it shall soar 90,000 miles into the sky. I walk out the door tossing my head back in laughter. How could we be ordinary men of the countryside? Ha ha ha. My wild, uninhibited laughter echoed across Swan Lake. I didn't even look back. A broken laurel crown? I didn't care for it at all. But what I didn't know was that this scene was witnessed perfectly by the newly arrived King Edward, the Duke of Lancaster, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Duke William. Hearing my 2 lines of poetry, Edward excitedly slapped his thigh. What a line. Should the great dragon one day ride the wind? Such a mad, heroic, and peerless masterpiece is absolutely today's laurel crown. But when Edward excitedly entered the pavilion and asked Alistair if the laurel crown went to the blind man. The old scholar awkwardly said it was someone else, and that the blind man had already declined the title and slipped away. Edward demanded to see all the poems I had written today. The more he read, the more excited he became, especially that free verse poem, which made his blood boil. When he saw the signature was Arthur, Edward completely snapped. These are Sir Arthur's poems? Grand Scholar, you actually didn't give the laurel crown to such divine masterpieces? Have you gone senile? Cedric added a knife to the back from the side. The Grand Scholar said Arthur is a blind man. He was afraid the noble ladies of his family would look down on a blind man, so he deliberately eliminated him. Hearing this, Edward's face turned completely black. He sneered repeatedly. What a fine scholar family. What a fine traditional noble. Your family's daughter puts on quite the airs, to even look down on the royal tutor of my second son, Prince Richard. Having said that, Edward took my poetry scrolls and stormed off with a flick of his sleeves. Alistair was left behind, his eyes almost popping out of his head. He is Prince Richard's tutor. The dignified chief scholar of a generation couldn't catch his breath. His eyes rolled back into his head, and he fainted dead away, falling straight backward. On the other side, Tristan learned from his father, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, that I was actually the prince's tutor. He was so terrified that his soul almost left his body, and his intestines turned green with regret. Just as he was in a state of deep anxiety, I had my subordinates invite him into a hidden alleyway. In front of my carriage, I pointed at his lapdog Simon, who had been beaten black and blue, and smiled at Tristan. My lord, the mad dog who provoked you into making an enemy out of me today is this one right here. He took 100 silver coins from the degenerate gambler Viscount Percival to deliberately use you as a spear. Hearing this, Tristan's eyes turned red with rage. He rushed forward and kicked Simon violently in the face, knocking his front teeth flying. I lightly dropped the sentence, every grievance has its source, every debt its debtor, before riding away leisurely in my carriage. Tristan told his father, Duke William, everything. When William heard that the Duke of Cornwall's family had used such underhanded methods to set up his son, he flew into a thunderous rage. He immediately took witnesses straight to the Red Keep to file a royal complaint. Edward was already dissatisfied with the Cornwall family for throwing their weight around as royal relatives. Now, his eyes were brimming with murderous intent. A political storm targeting the Duke of Cornwall had quietly begun, all because of my move of borrowing a knife to kill. Meanwhile, the scheming Duke of Lancaster ran home excitedly, holding the parchment with copies of my poems. He grabbed his daughter Eleanor. Not only did he not scold her for mixing with a blind man, but his eyes shone as he asked, Eleanor, do you like Sir Arthur? Eleanor blushed furiously, entirely at a loss for what to do. The Duke of Lancaster said earnestly, so what if he's blind? With his talent alone, he will absolutely leave his name in history. Not to mention he's the prince's tutor and deeply valued by the king. As long as you like him, your father will absolutely support you in chasing after him. Make him the son-in-law of our family. Eleanor was both shocked and overjoyed, her heart pounding like a deer. She was already secretly calculating how to get closer to me. But his family wasn't the only one eyeing this marriage. Inside the Red Keep, King Edward also had his sights set on me. He specially called for Princess Isabella and asked if she was willing to marry me. Isabella naturally had a favorable impression of me, but she helplessly reminded the king, Father, the kingdom's laws stipulate that a prince consort marrying a princess cannot keep bedchamber maids, and he must divorce his current wife. Sir Arthur values loyalty and affection. He definitely won't abandon his commoner first wife. As Edward was fretting over how to break this deadlock, the abdicated and house-searched old King Harry strolled over with his little granddaughter, Alice, on his back. Learning of Edward's dilemma, old Harry slapped his thigh and laughed out loud. Edward, why are you so rigid? Simple. You just take Arthur's first wife as an honorary adopted daughter and grant her a princess title. Then, when the two princesses marry him together, no one will dare gossip. Edward and Isabella were completely stunned. To think the dignified abdicated king could come up with such a god-tier maneuver to exploit legal loopholes. Even little Alice, riding on old Harry's neck, clapped her hands and joined the fun. Yay, yay. Grandpa said he's taking me to Sir Arthur's house for dinner tomorrow. When I grow up, I want to marry Sir Arthur too, so I can eat delicious food every day. Isabella didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but Edward's mind had completely begun to churn with ideas. And right now, the chief scholar's family was already in total chaos. Because the news of their shady manipulation to suppress me had spread throughout London, the public was cursing them for being sore losers, completely ruining their reputation. After waking up, Alistair beat his chest and stomped his feet in regret, crying out that he was a sinner to his family. He quickly ordered his son Albert to go out and spread the news that Arthur is the true Laurel Crown winner in an attempt to salvage their dignity. The family's legitimate genius daughter, Cecilia, also learned the truth. When she saw my line, should the great dragon one day ride the wind, this haughty, self-proclaimed pure talent was completely conquered. She bit her lip and made up her mind. Since grandfather made a mistake, for the sake of the family's reputation, I am willing to compromise and marry this blind man as his bedchamber maid. Ironically, she had no idea that I simply didn't care about her, nor did I care about the so-called century-old family of scholars. By this day, I had already moved my family into a newly renovated red brick, slate-roofed manor with a courtyard inside London. The estate was spacious and grand, flanked by two majestic stone lion statues at the gates. I didn't sit idle. As soon as we settled in, I secretly built a large boiler in the backyard. I was going to fire Venetian stained glass. As long as I could produce glass 7 if if it was uneven, low-quality stuff I could build a greenhouse in the dead of winter to grow vegetables. When that time came, the gold coins I'd make would be an astronomical figure. Just as I was busy working, the gatekeeper announced that young Master Felix, a merchant from the southern shires, requested an audience. As soon as I entered the drawing room, I smelled a faint fragrance. Looking at the boy's red lips, white teeth, and snow-white skin, I immediately burst out laughing in my heart. A woman cross-dressing as a man? Interesting. This young Master Felix, claiming to be Philip, had taken a fancy to the tea leaves in my shop and wanted to expand the business to the south. As soon as she opened her mouth, she demanded a 30% commission. I put on a cold face and directly shot her down, telling her I could very well send my own people to sell it. Seeing this, she quickly changed her tune to 20%, bringing up excuses like how the southern squires and local tyrants were numerous, and that her family had the power to smooth things over. I played along and tossed her a dealership rights proposal. I sell top-tier Earl Grey tea for 5 silver coins. I'll give it to you for 4. Hand-roasted green tea is 10. I'll give it to you for 8. As for how much you sell it for in the south, that depends on your own ability. Philip was overjoyed upon hearing this. She readily agreed and happily ran back to get the money. Little did she know, the cost of these tea leaves wasn't even 10% of that. My move here was pure catching a white wolf, empty-handed, zero risk, massive profit. After sending away this cross-dressing god of wealth, it was already late. After dinner, I lay in bed early to rest. Not long after, the door was gently pushed open. Using my special mind's eye holographic senses, I saw that the person who entered wasn't my virtuous legal wife Illyra, but my newly bought, breathtakingly beautiful bedchamber maid, Maggie. She had just finished bathing and still carried the scent of moisture. Her cheeks were as red as ripe apples, and she was so nervous she didn't know where to put her hands and feet. I chuckled inwardly but maintained an emotionless facade as I patted the bed beside me. Darling, come quickly. I've warmed the covers for you. Maggie was so shy her voice was like a mosquito. Master, it's Maggie. I feigned surprise. Why is it you? Where is the madam? Maggie lowered her head, twisting the corner of her apron with her fingers. The madam asked me to come. Good lord, my first wife was way too understanding. I deliberately put on a stern face, adopting the demeanor of the head of the household. You come just because the madam tells you to? I'm the one who hired you as a maid. How can you only listen to the madam? No, today you must listen to me. Come here. Maggie trembled all over, and as if accepting her fate, she threw herself into my embrace with a blushing face, with a beauty throwing herself into my arms. How could I, a proud, 7-foot man, push her away? These heavenly days had just begun. Last night, a beauty threw herself into my arms. The spring night was short, and life was full of vibrant colors. However, the new manor in London had just been renovated, and the humidity was too heavy. Staying too long would easily cause eczema. Early the next morning, I packed up my family and returned to my territory in Oak Valley Village. No sooner had I left than an unprecedented storm erupted in the royal court of the Kingdom of Albion. As soon as the morning assembly began, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Duke William, unceremoniously dropped a massive bombshell. He formally accused the current king's relative, the Duke of Cornwall, right there in court. He accused the Duke's son, Viscount Percival, of paying mercenaries to instigate a feud between the Chancellor's family and me, the Baron of Oak Valley. Relying on his status as a royal relative, the Duke of Cornwall initially looked completely disdainful, shouting about being wronged and even biting back, accusing Duke William of making false claims. Just as the two sides were locked in a stalemate, my 8-year-old disciple, Prince Richard, holding a letter I had given him the day before, walked grandly into the throne room of the Red Keep and handed it personally to King Edward. Edward tore open the letter and took just one look before instantly flying into a thunderous rage, slamming his hand onto the throne. Outrageous. All the civil and military officials were totally dumbfounded. No one knew what was written in my letter. Edward didn't even give the Duke of Cornwall a chance to defend himself. He immediately ordered the Chief Justice of the Royal Inquisition and the commander of the Royal Iron Guard to lead 500 fully armed iron guards to completely surround the royal asset vault and strictly audit the royal properties. In just half an hour, the Inquisition turned the place upside down. Over 40 deeds to royal estates managed by the Asset Vault in London, York, the Southern Shires, and elsewhere had all vanished into thin air. The Duke of Cornwall's son, Percival, was dragged into the Great Hall. He literally pissed himself on the spot, crying as he confessed that he had secretly sold royal real estate worth over 100,000 gold sovereigns and lost it all at an underground casino. This was the early years right after the kingdom's civil war had ended. The national treasury was empty. Even Queen Margaret had shortened the hem of her skirts to expose her insteps just to save money. Yet a member of the royal clan had dared to gamble away over 100,000 gold coins. Edward's wrath was like a thunderbolt. He issued a decree on the spot. Percival was to be exiled to the Cursed Archipelago, a place filled with plagues and ferocious beasts, and banned from ever returning to London. Immediately after, Edward turned and glared fixedly at the Duke of Cornwall, coldly announcing, "The Duke of Cornwall has committed gross dereliction of duty. You are stripped of your role managing the asset vault, stripped of your titles, dismissed from office, and ordered to roll back to your hometown to retire." The entire throne room fell dead silent. The Duke of Cornwall slumped to the floor, his eyes splitting with rage. In his wildest dreams, he never thought that I, a blind man wearing a black silk silk blindfold, not only didn't fall for his borrowing a knife to kill scheme, but had backhanded him with a single letter, effortlessly stripping a royal relative and dignified duke of his title and office. This is my method. Rather than play political mind games with you, I'd rather sever the root with a single slice and end the trouble forever. The dismissed Duke of Cornwall couldn't swallow this insult. After sending off his exiled son, he rode his carriage straight to my Oak Valley village. When he saw that the originally dilapidated Oak Valley village had, in just a few short months, been built into a bustling market town rivaling London's Grand Bazaar, complete with neat rows of red brick, slate-roofed houses and expansive workshop, she was utterly shocked. With a gloomy face, he walked into my courtyard and said through gritted teeth, "Arthur, your methods are ruthless. A single letter caused me to lose my office and title, and sent my son to be exiled in the archipelago. We had no grievances or enmity. Why did you have to be so absolute?" Sitting in my chair, I sneered, "No grievances or enmity. From the moment you found out the king gifted this territory to me, you father and son had already marked me as a man who must be killed. Since we were bound to be sworn enemies locked in a death struggle sooner or later, why should I be soft-hearted toward you?" The Duke of Cornwall was rendered speechless. He could only force a fake smile and drop a harsh threat. "Fine. Since you are heartless, don't blame me for being unjust. My family will play this game with you to the bitter end." He flicked his sleeves and left, running to the abdicated old King Harry to complain and beg for mercy. But old Harry had long seen the situation clearly. He knew Edward was desperate for talent, and he knew my value far exceeded that of a fallen noble. Old Harry explicitly warned him, "Arthur is a sage the king desperately wants to utilize, and he is also an old friend of mine. If you insist on having your way, you will bear the consequences." The Duke of Cornwall completely despaired and could only leave in hatred. No sooner had he left than the kingdom's chief scholar, Alastair, brought his son Albert to my manor in a carriage. This old man was here to bow his head and clear his name. Because he had eliminated me at the poetry gathering yesterday for being blind, his group of rigid scholars had been cursed by the city's commoners until their reputation was in tatters. To salvage his dignity, he specifically came today to apologize at my door and to fulfill his promise to marry off his lofty, brilliant granddaughter, Cecilia, to me. I smiled faintly and pulled my legal wife, Illyra, to my side. "Lord Scholar, I am truly sorry, but I already have a family. My wife and I have shared thick and thin together, and I will absolutely never divorce my wife to marry another." Alastair and Albert were completely dumbfounded. They were a dignified, century-old scholar family. How could the legitimate daughter of their family possibly be someone else's secondary bedchamber maid? Wouldn't they be laughed at by the entire kingdom? What was even more fatal was that old Harry was currently at my house mooching a meal, along with Princess Isabella and the little Princess Alice. Little Alice innocently chimed in, "Huh? Wasn't Aunt Isabella going to marry Sir Arthur? Why is there another one coming?" As soon as these words were spoken, the scholar father and son's eyes nearly bulged out of their heads. What was the situation? Were two princesses of Albion also going to marry down to this blind man, and possibly only as secondary wives? Competing with royal princesses for a main event, if they were given 10 times their courage, they wouldn't dare. The father and son quickly took the out I gave them, using time will fade everything as an excuse to hurriedly gloss over this hot potato of a marriage, and ran back to the city with their tails between their legs. I was also happy for the peace and quiet. I wouldn't take this kind of arrogant noble daughter even if she were given to me for free. Having dealt with this nonsense, I began to focus on making money. Firing stained glass was my next highly lucrative project, but this matter absolutely could not be leaked. I called in Marcus and Daniel, the veteran soldiers in charge of guarding the estate. I tossed the keys to the vault filled with my profits directly onto the table. "You two, firing glass is a top secret. It dictates whether we can squeeze dry the gold coins of those Blackheart merchants. Here are the keys to the vault. Use the money inside however you see fit. Consider it my sincerity in trusting you." Hearing this, one-eyed Marcus' face turned red, and he glared at me, roaring, "Master, you are insulting us with the sour stench of silver coins." Fastblade Daniel even shoved the keys straight back into my hand. "Master, we've lived half our lives. Do you think we follow you for this little bit of money? You are testing us." I laughed out loud. These two old military hounds were indeed reliable. I decisively took the keys back. "All right, since you two are straightforward, I will raise your wages to 50 silver coins a month. Furthermore, a daily extra supply of 1 pound of aged, high-proof distilled liquor." Upon hearing there was strong liquor to drink, the eyes of these two old drunks shone brightly. They rubbed their hands together in excitement, acting as if they'd been injected with chicken blood. With these two dead set on helping me fire the kills, mass-producing glass was only a matter of time. The next day, as usual, I gave the 8-year-old Prince Richard his lessons in the courtyard. Having just learned division, he excitedly asked me, "Sir, you previously said you wanted all the commoners in the kingdom to have books to read, for everyone to be literate. How exactly can that be achieved?" Through the holographic radar senses of my mind's eye, I had long noticed several uninvited guests outside the courtyard wall. Besides the familiar old Harry and his guards, it was actually the current King Edward and Queen Margaret. They were visiting in disguise and were hiding at the base of the wall, eavesdropping. Pretending not to know, I casually replied, "The reason books are scarce in the kingdom today is that all parchment scrolls or books must be copied by hand or carved onto full wooden blocks. If one word is carved wrong, the whole block is ruined. If you want to popularize books, you couldn't finish printing them all in decades. Furthermore, knowledge is entirely monopolized by those 7 ancient bloodline families. How could commoner children possibly afford to read? Outside the wall, Edward and old Harry looked grim upon hearing this. This was the exact mountain pressing down on the royal authority. Richard asked in distress, "Then what brilliant plan does Sir have?" I smiled slightly and directly dropped a dimensional strike nuclear weapon that was centuries ahead of this era. Very simple. The movable type printing press. Carve all the letters and word roots into individual metal type pieces using lead or hardwood. When you want to print a book, you find the corresponding type pieces and arrange them on an iron plate. Once you finish printing this book, you disassemble the type pieces and use them to print the next one. As long as you prepare a few sets of lead type libraries, all the books in the world can be printed in massive quantities in mere days. Boom! These words were like thunder striking the flat ground. In the courtyard, Richard's jaw dropped in shock. Outside the wall, Edward looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. He was so excited the veins on his forehead popped, his eyes staring fixedly at the courtyard gate, his breathing ragged. Queen Margaret was even paler with shock. Breaking the monopoly of the noble families and winning the hearts of all the commoners in the realm, this grand ambition of a 1,000-year sage king had been completely solved by a blind man with just a few casual sentences. Before they could recover their wits, I took out a piece of parchment. "Little Richard, making paper and printing books are merely tools. If you want people to learn to read quickly, I will teach you an enlightenment artifact 100 times faster than the Latin long scrolls the church teaches phonics. Come, read after your tutor. This sounds like E." Once Richard understood the principles of phonics, he literally danced with joy, exclaiming that this phonetic method was absolutely ingenious. As long as one learned the pronunciation rules of these few dozen symbols, they could sound out all the words in the world by themselves. Richard respectfully bowed to me, offering a grand knight's salute. "Sir possesses great talent. Please accept your disciple's bow." At this moment, old Harry outside the wall could finally no longer suppress his excitement. Laughing loudly, he led Edward and the Queen into the courtyard. "Ha ha ha, Arthur my boy, this old man brought his son and daughter-in-law, dragging the whole family over to mooch a meal today. You won't mind, will you?" Old Harry was beaming with pride. Edward quickly stepped forward, keeping his posture extremely low. He even looked a bit nervous as he placed a hand over his chest and bowed. "I am little Richard's father. I hold a post in the Ministry of Finance. I have long admired Mr. Arthur's great name. Having just heard your wondrous idea for movable type printing, I am thoroughly impressed and bow to your superiority." Queen Margaret also bowed gracefully. "Thank you, sir, for teaching my son. It was a pity this royal family didn't become court actors." I played along, calling them old friend and madam, then personally turned and headed into the kitchen. Today we had honored guests. I had to show them what true cuisine was. In the kitchen, my beautiful wife Maggie and I busied ourselves for over an hour. The people of the Middle Ages had only ever known boiled stews and coarse roasted meat. When 8 beautifully colored, aromatic, and flavorful cast iron wok stir-fried butter dishes were served, Edward and old Harry's eyes nearly dropped onto the plates. Black pepper braised pig trotters, maple wood smoked ribs, butter and herb pan's-eared sea cucumber, garlic meat jelly. Finally, I served a plate of golden, crispy honey-fried grubs. The moment the Queen saw they were bugs, the color drained from her beautiful face. Edward also gulped repeatedly, not daring to lower his fork. I smiled and explained, "These are high-protein grubs. Their nutritional value is higher than eggs. Eating more of them cures night blindness." Little Alice couldn't care less. With quick hands, she pinched one and popped it into her mouth, her eyes shining with greed. "Mother, this is so delicious. This little girl, when the winter famine hits next year, she will definitely be a perfect little salesperson." Besides the food, I directly brought out a jug of 50-degree high-proof distilled liquor I had made last night. The moment the wax-sealed wooden stopper was pulled out, an incredibly pungent and rich aroma of alcohol instantly filled the entire courtyard. Old Harry sniffed hard, his saliva almost drooling out. "Fragrant, too fragrant. This old man has drunk countless wines, but never have I smelled such mellow and fragrant good liquor. What is the name of this wine?" "Oak Valley Dew." I casually plagiarized the tone of Western epics, putting on the guise of a prophetic scholar and reciting, "The endless spring rain washes the soul of the traveler. On this bleak and desolate road, where can one find a cup of warm, strong spirit?" The shepherd boy smiles, pointing far away to the fragrant Oak Valley. Edward tapped the table in praise. "Good poem, good wine. I toast to you, sir." This iron-fisted king was also a tough guy. He picked up his tall wooden goblet and downed more than half a cup of the 50-degree, high-purity distilled spirit in one gulp. The next second, Edward's face turned purplish red. Cough, 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 cough. The strong liquor going down his throat was like a fire burning all the way to his stomach. He clutched his chest and coughed for the time it takes to drink half a cup of tea, tears streaming down his face. Wiping his tears, he exclaimed, "How can such strong liquor exist in this world? One gulp nearly took half my life. Good wine, the nectar of the gods." Everyone else learned their lesson and began to sip it slowly. After a few rounds of drinks, Edward finally couldn't suppress his anxieties about ruling the country. He put down his cup, looked at me gravely, and asked, Mr. Arthur, ever since the current king ascended the throne, he has wanted to increase the kingdom's population and encourage childbirth. But even if the government provides silver coin subsidies, the commoners are still unwilling to have more children. The national treasury also doesn't have enough tax revenue to build bridges, pave roads, maintain the army, or provide disaster relief. Does Sir have any brilliant strategies? I took a sip of wine and sneered. Old friend, why are the serfs and commoners unwilling to have children? Because what the kingdom collects is a poll tax. If you give birth to a person, you have to pay an extra portion of tax, and you still get dragged away by the Lord to do free, unpaid corvée labor. Who would dare to have children under those conditions? If you want to completely solve this problem, make the kingdom's population explode, and fill the treasury, there is only one phrase. I held up a single finger, my voice resounding like striking metal. Abolish the poll tax and implement a unified land tax. Edward and old Harry looked completely bewildered. What is a unified land tax? I spoke with forceful clarity. First, abolish all poll taxes and assorted exorbitant levies, and fold them entirely into the land. However many acres of land the commoners own, that is how much tax they pay. The poor with no land won't have to pay a single copper coin. Second, completely abolish the unpaid corvée labor of the commoners. If the lords or the government want to build bridges or pave roads, they must spend money to hire people. Edward gasped, cold sweat beading on his forehead. Sir, if we abolish the poll tax and corvée labor, what if the treasury doesn't have enough money? I asked back with a face full of disdain. Who told you that to collect taxes, you can only stare at those few miserable, suffering farmers? The kingdom is literally guarding a mountain of gold, yet it insists on believing in valuing agriculture while suppressing commerce and despising merchants. Farming can only feed a country. Artisans can strengthen a country. But commerce is what truly makes a country rich. As long as you encourage commerce, open up trading ports, and heavily tax merchants, the commercial tax from a single major port alone will rival the agricultural tax of the entire nation. When that time comes, gold coins will flow endlessly into the treasury, and Albion will surely have all nations coming to pay tribute. These economic and taxation concepts, advanced by over 1,000 years, struck Edward's forehead like divine lightning from the highest heavens. He abruptly stood up, completely discarding his disguised facade. Toward me, a blind man wearing an eye patch, he respectfully and with utmost reverence bowed deeply. Sir possesses peerless talent. Please, sir, teach me. I took a sip of wine, pursed my lips, and said, I strongly disagree with the kingdom's old class division of nobles, knights, serfs, and lowly merchants. Agriculture feeds the country, industry strengthens it, commerce enriches it. What can that bunch of noble bureaucrats do for the kingdom? The so-called noble bureaucrats are nothing but freeloaders. Officials don't need to be numerous. Competence should come first. One capable executive officer is worth dozens, even hundreds, of useless winesack lords. Court scholars are even worse to mention. Most of them are just empty talkers who only know how to discuss theories on paper and recite Latin. They have never been able to enrich the country, let alone feed or strengthen it. Of course, I'm not disparaging all scholars. There are plenty of individuals with true talent and practical ability among them. Let's talk about commerce first. The kingdom is clearly sitting on the gold and silver mountain of the merchant industry, yet it stubbornly labels merchants as lowly. How massive is the wealth of trade? By adding a commercial tax in one region, it could almost rival the tax revenue of the entire kingdom. Encouraging trade also allows for maritime commerce with multiple nations. Once the economic system forms and commercial taxes are levied, the state will have an endless stream of gold coins filling the treasury. This is the first principle of enriching the nation. Edward actually had a vague sense of these things, but he had never dared to implement them so drastically. I continued, merchants might be considered unrefined, but the benefits of trade must absolutely not be ignored. The people feed the state, the merchants enrich it. I don't need to elaborate on this. Since you work in the Ministry of Finance, you know this better than I do. Industry strengthens the country. By artisans, I don't just mean simple blacksmiths. Industry covers every sector. Building bridges, paving roads, town construction, basic tools, military equipment, not a single one of these can be separated from the artisan guilds. Just as I was getting into the flow, someone walked into the courtyard. It was the blacksmith apprentice, Bruce. Bruce carried in the heavy deep-tilling plow I had ordered him to forge. Edward and his family gathered around to look at it for a long time, their faces full of confusion. Tapping my cane, I walked over and struck the iron plow with it. The crisp, metallic cling made Edward gasp on the spot. He yelled in absolute shock. Good iron, good steel. The sound is crisp, with almost no impurities. My wife Illyra proudly said from the side. My husband improved the forging blast furnace to hammer out the impurities from ordinary steel. Edward was so excited he could barely speak, stuttering as he asked if I knew the art of forging steel. I didn't bother hiding it, telling him it was the Damascus folded steel forging method, and that 5 men could easily produce 100 pounds of refined steel a day. Edward looked up at the sky and sighed deeply, full of grief and indignation. He said that the Royal Artisan Guild's thousands of craftsmen only produced a few thousand pounds a year, while my 5 men could produce 100 pounds in a single day. He suddenly bowed to me at a 90-degree angle, his eyes red as he begged me to teach him the folded steel method, saying he wanted to forge divine weapons for the Night's Watch Knights of the North. I helped him up and told him the secret of using borax to remove impurities during the steelmaking process. After Edward memorized it, he asked about the function of the deep-tilling plow. I told him this thing could turn over deep, wet soil. A serf using a pitchfork could turn 1 acre a day. Using this thing pulled by an ox, one person could turn dozens, even 100 acres a day. Edward was ecstatic, proclaiming it an artifact of agriculture. I casually roasted the establishment. This thing's real name is the Roman heavy plow. It existed during the ancient empire. It's clearly recorded in the Ministry of Works blueprints, but they hide it away and won't let the commoners use it. The royal court really is raising a bunch of useless wine sacks. Hearing this, Edward's mouth twitched wildly. I knew the Royal Ministry of Works was about to meet its doom. Edward dragged his family and borrowed my heavy deep-tilling plow, rushing back to the Red Keep without stopping to test it. The result? In the span of a late afternoon, 1 man and 1 ox turned over more than 20 acres of land. He stayed up all night digging through the Royal Ministry of Works archives, and sure enough, he found the Roman heavy plow in the agricultural tool blueprints. He was so furious he smashed the table in the king's study, cursing the Royal Ministry of Works for being a bunch of useless sacks of wine. Early the next morning, he marched straight to the Royal Artisan Guild, personally instructed the blacksmiths to improve the blast furnaces, and within half a day, they forged over 100 pounds of Damascus refined steel. Edward went completely insane. He immediately ordered unlimited gold to be withdrawn from the treasury to mass-produce heavy knight swords and deep plows. At the morning court assembly in the Red Keep's throne room the following day, Edward placed a piece of burlap over something in the center of the hall. Duke Victor the Iron Fist curiously lifted it, and the entire court of nobles was bewildered. Edward coldly announced that this was a heavy deep-tilling plow capable of reclaiming 100 acres of fertile land a day. The clueless minister of works foolishly echoed that it should be promoted. Edward instantly turned on him, furiously berating the minister for letting a divine artifact gather dust. On the spot, he stripped the high and mighty minister of works of his core titles and demoted him to a marginal agricultural inspection officer. Following that, Edward dropped another massive bombshell: the papermaking technique and movable type printing press I had taught Prince Richard. The scheming Duke of Lancaster and the other civil officials were so shocked their eyes almost popped out of their heads. Before they could even digest that, Edward threw out a royal flush: the Damascus refined steel forging method I provided, which could produce 100 pounds a day. The entire court instantly exploded. Knights and generals danced with wild joy. The commander of the Royal Knights, God of War Richard, had red eyes as he roared that within 3 years, they would wash away the shame of the northern Viking barbarians reaching the wall, striking while the iron was hot. Edward issued 3 consecutive king's edicts right there on the spot. The first edict: for the merit of creating the deep plow, I was titled Viscount of Oak Valley and granted a fiefdom of 300 serf households. The second edict: for the merit of improving papermaking and the printing press, I was titled Earl of Oak Valley and granted a fiefdom of 1,000 households. The third edict: for presenting the refined steel forging method, I was granted the title of Marquis of the Realm, hereditary for 3 generations, a fiefdom of 10,000 households. This was the first honor of its kind since the founding of the Kingdom of Albion. Iron-faced Chief Justice Sir Sterling and the other civil officials jumped in panic, screaming that the rewards were too heavy and violated ancient noble traditions. But military generals like God of War Richard and Baron Colin the Wild Boar pointed at the civil officials' noses and cursed them out, staunchly supporting me. Edward completely ignored the officials and directly dismissed the court. The military generals got together and rode out of the city in a massive procession, wanting to come to my territory to thank me in person. At this point, I still didn't know I had been named Marquis of the Realm. Outside London, Lord Cedric, the eldest grandson of the recently dismissed Duke of Cornwall, was leading 4 of his cousins and 200 fully armed, black-clad knights, galloping wildly toward my Oak Valley village. This all started because the letter I wrote earlier had caused his grandfather to lose his titles and his uncle to be exiled to the cursed archipelago. Relying on their status as distant royal relatives, this gang of spoiled brats used the guise of hunting rebels to trample my fief and crush Maya Blind Manto establish their dominance. On the other side, the famous Sundra genius of London, Lady Cecilia, happened to be visiting my village for pleasure. Seeing the red brick, slate-roofed houses I had built for the villagers, and hearing the village aunties sing my praises, she was incredibly curious about me. Suddenly, the thunderous sound of hooves echoed from the village entrance. The 5 young masters of the Cornwall family and their 200 black-clad knights arrogantly charged into the village. Looking down from his high horse, Lord Cedric pointed at village chief Sir Gareth and cursed, forcing the villagers to clear the way, threatening to arrest them as rebel accomplices if they didn't. Old Gareth coldly snorted, stating that galloping horses was forbidden in the territory. The Cornwall family's 4th son drew his longsword, ready to hack people down. Cedric's eyes flashed with malice, and he ordered his men to prepare a charge to trample the villagers to death. Just then, hundreds of villagers wielding pitchforks, shovels, and broken bricks charged over with bloodshot eyes from all directions. Retired veterans, bricklayers, and even peasant women wielding cast iron frying pans blocked the middle of the road. Mr. Arthur gives us bread to eat and warm houses to live in. Whoever dares to bully Mr. Arthur, well, fight them to the death. The roar that erupted from the crowd startled the Cornwall family's warhorses, forcing them to step back repeatedly. Hiding in a corner watching the show, Old King Harry couldn't help but slap his thigh and sigh. He who wins the hearts of the people is invincible in the kingdom. Mr. Arthur is here, someone shouted. The furious villagers automatically parted to make a path. Wearing my black silk blindfold and holding my cane, I walked out unhurriedly, followed by my wife Illyra and my maid Maggie. Hiding in the crowd, Cecilia sneaked a peek at me and actually blushed at my cold, handsome profile. I stopped less than 5 paces in front of the Cornwall family's cavalry, resting my right hand on the hilt of the sword concealed within my cane. Cedric sized me up with a sneer, shouting that he was going to search my manor and arrest rebels. The slight smile on my face vanished. I raised my cane, drew a long, deep mark in the dirt, and used the gentlest voice to speak the most ruthless words. Marcus, Daniel, this is the boundary line. Whoever crosses it, kill. If they all cross it, leave none alive. If anything happens, I, as the lord of this land, will take the fall. In short, whoever dares to bare their fangs, pull out all their teeth. The entire area fell dead silent. Then, my veteran bodyguard, Fast Blade Daniel, drew his two-handed greatsword and let out a deafening, maniacal laugh. He used to be the royal personal guard to Old King Harry. His hands had been drenched in an ocean of heretic blood. He rested the greatsword on his shoulder, took a large stride behind the boundary line, and pointed at the Cornwall family's black-clad knights, cursing. Come, come, come. If you have the balls, step over. Your grandpa Daniel hasn't opened his killing tab in years. Today, he'll use you little bastards for sword practice. Provoked, Cedric's face twitched, and he spurred his horse to cross the line. The very instant the horse's head crossed the boundary, Daniel took a step forward. With a swing of his sword, swing, an iron-armored horse's head hit the ground with a thud. Blood sprayed over 10 meters away. The headless horse collapsed with a crash, nearly crushing Cedric to death. The young masters of the Cornwall family were both shocked and furious. Daniel sneered. Your horse's head crossed the line. Cedric went completely insane. Roaring, he ordered a charge, placing a bounty of 1,000 gold sovereigns on Daniel's life. The 200 black-clad knights were just about to make their move. At this hair-trigger moment, when blood was about to flow like rivers, a sharp horn blast and a loud shout suddenly rang out from behind the cavalry. The king's edict has arrived. Everyone was stunned. Cedric quickly had someone drag the headless warhorse away and led his knights to dismount and clear the path. A royal herald walked up to me and read loudly, conferring upon the Baron of Oak Valley, Arthur, for the merit of creating the deep plough, promoted to Viscount of Oak Valley, rewarded with 1,000 gold coins, and granted a fief of 300 households. I calmly accepted the parchment scroll stamped with the wax seal. Cedric mocked me from the side. No wonder you have nothing to fear, so you rendered a meritorious service. Do you think that just because you're a mere Viscount I wouldn't dare touch you? All knights, prepare to charge. The king's edict has arrived again. Before he could even draw his sword, another shout rang out. A second herald ran up and unrolled a parchment. For the merit of papermaking and inventing the movable type printing press, promoted to Earl of Oak Valley, rewarded with 5,000 gold coins, and granted a fief of 1,000 households. Cedric's eye twitched violently. Gritting his teeth, he said, "What alchemy craftsman's parlor tricks? You're just a newly minted earl. My Cornwall family still doesn't take you seriously. The Supreme King's edict has arrived." A third voice sounded, exactly like a death knell. The entire village was dumbfounded. Even old King Harry in the corner wondered what the hell Edward was playing at. Cedric and his cousins were so terrified they backed up to the side of the road. The herald unrolled a gold-fringed parchment. For presenting the Damascus refined steel forging method, strengthening the kingdom's military might, promoted to Marquis of the Realm, hereditary for 3 generations, and granted a fief of 10,000 households. The air completely froze. A Marquis of 10,000 households. The first person to achieve this since the founding of Albion. The black-clad knight Cedric brought trembled all over. The faces of the family's young masters looked worse than if they had eaten dead flies. One of them almost cried, "Cousin, this is a hereditary Marquis of 10,000 households. Even my dad isn't dead yet, so I haven't inherited a title. Let's run." Cedric's face spasmed, feeling unprecedented humiliation. Caught between a rock and a hard place, he gritted his teeth and dropped a harsh threat. "Dead blind man, you win this round. Just wait and see." He turned around, wanting to slip away with his men. The moment he turned, he bumped straight into 5 towering, armored giants striding over. The leader, sporting a black eye, was Prince Henry of Gloucester. Beside him were the kingdom's god of war, Commander Richard, Duke Victor the Iron Fist, Baron Colin the Wild Boar, and Earl Galahad the Lionheart. Half the military might of the Kingdom of Albion had all fucking shown up. Cedric was scared out of his wits and quickly pulled his cousins to hide behind the horses' rumps. Duke Victor had a violent temper. Seeing that the situation looked off, he grabbed a black-clad knight and slammed him into the mud to interrogate him. The knight's courage had long been shattered. He stuttered out everything, saying the Cornwall young masters came to butcher the blind man to establish dominance. Hearing this, Victor's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. A dignified, distant royal relative, doing this kind of lowly shit. Go fuck your mother. He swung his massive arm, throwing the knight away like a broken sack. The man's head smashed directly into a red brick wall, bursting open on the spot dead as a doornail. Cedric watched with red eyes, but didn't even dare to let out a fart. The enraged Victor still hadn't vented enough. He strode over to the youngest, Master Roland, grabbed him by his velvet collar and roared, "You've got quite the expensive clothes on, boy. Which little bastard of the Cornwall family are you?" Little Roland was already timid by nature. Where had he ever seen a living king of hell like this, full of scars and radiating murderous intent? His face went deathly pale. With two gurgling sounds from his throat, he actually vomited a mouthful of green bile. His eyes rolled back, his neck snapped to the side. He literally died of fright. Dead silence fell over the scene. Victor was so shocked he took 2 huge steps back, quickly letting go to clear his name. "The God of Light is my witness. I didn't even use force. Everyone saw it. He had a disease and scared himself to death. It has nothing to do with me." Holding his cousin's corpse, Cedric was filled with grief and indignation. He roared that this was going too far and that he was going into the Red Keep to ask the king for justice. Baron Colin mocked him from the side. "You brought 200 knights to someone else's territory to show off your might, and now you have the nerve to ask his majesty for justice? Was your knightly honor eaten by dogs?" This group of spoiled brats from the Cornwall family could only tuck their tails between their legs, carry the corpse, and scramble out of Oak Valley Village. A crisis thus ended in such a dramatic fashion. With the crisis resolved and the onlookers dispersed, the villagers surrounded me. They insisted on shoving baskets of eggs, freshly caught live fish, and wild vegetables into my arms. Unable to refuse, I had no choice but to accept them, returning to the manor reeking of fish. As soon as I entered the courtyard, my wife Illyra hugged me excitedly, her face full of admiration. She said that our family was now a marquee of 10,000 households, and we would collect so much rent come the autumn harvest. I patted her head and smiled, telling her that aside from the wealthy households, the grain rent for all the poor serfs would be completely waived. Upon hearing this, not only was Illyra not angry, but she felt even more that I had a kind heart. A short while later, old Tom the gatekeeper led the god of war Richard, Baron Colin, and this group of military heavyweights into the grand hall. Even though I was blind, I could see right through these old foxes' minds. They were here specifically to thank me for presenting the Damascus refined steel. After exchanging pleasantries, Duke Victor the Iron Fist patted his chest and guaranteed that if the Cornwall family dared to cause trouble again, he would settle it for me. He was an expert at fighting injustices. But I didn't want to owe favors, so I smiled and politely declined. Seeing that it was almost noon, I asked the kitchen to prepare a meal and kept these generals representing half of Albion's military might for a casual lunch. Just as everyone was chatting, the gatekeeper announced that Charlie, the chief steward of the palace from the Red Keep, had rushed over with several royal physicians. It turned out that Edward had heard about my eye affliction and specifically sent people to cure my eyes. To be honest, Edward's gesture moved me a bit. I took off my blindfold. The physicians took turns examining me, but in the end, they all shook their heads helplessly. Chief Physician Bernard sighed and said that the divine essence in my eyes was dead. Because I was blinded by intense light, there was nothing they could do. Steward Charlie anxiously slapped his thigh, his face full of worry. Just as I smiled and said I was already used to it, Bernard's eyes suddenly lit up. He said there was one person left in London who could cure it, the wandering grandmaster of alchemy and medicine, Paracelsus. Hearing this, Charlie immediately led his men back to the Red Keep to find King Edward, intending to use the power of the royal family to locate this grandmaster. As soon as they left, my wife Illyra couldn't hold back anymore. She rushed forward, threw herself into my arms, and wept tears of joy. She choked out that as long as this grandmaster could be found to cure my eyes, she was willing to kowtow every step of the way from the manor gates all the way to the Grand Cathedral of Light. Hearing her words warmed my heart. To have such a wife, what more could a husband ask for? After sending off the royal physicians Edward sent to examine my eyes, the food in the courtyard was just about ready. Albion's god of war Richard, Wild Boar Colin, Iron Fist Victor, and this group of important kingdom ministers were all waiting eagerly in my courtyard for the meal to start. I first had the maid bring out 6 deep wooden bowls, larger than a person's face and steaming hot. Prince Henry of Gloucester leaned over to look, and his face instantly darkened. In such massive bowls, there was only a small nest of pasta. He sneered, asking in a passive-aggressive tone if I thought they were useless gluttons, serving them clear soup and watery scraps to brush them off, calling it an absolute disgrace to knights. I didn't get angry. I smiled and explained that people in Albion weren't accustomed to eating a hearty breakfast, and drinking strong liquor on an empty stomach was bad for them, so this was just an appetizer. Before my words fully faded, my little maid Maggie walked out holding a scorching hot cast-iron pan of oil. Boiling butter mixed with hot oil was poured directly over the minced garlic and herbs on top of the pasta. With a loud sizzle, a pungent, overwhelmingly rich aroma instantly exploded in the courtyard. As soon as the 6 bowls of hot oil garlic pasta were pushed in front of them, the eyes of these dukes and lords woe had only ever seen palace stews went completely straight. Baron Colin grabbed his fork, mixed it wildly, picked up the wooden bowl, and slurped a massive mouthful. In less than 20 seconds, the bowl bigger than his face was licked completely clean. Colin closed his eyes and exclaimed that compared to this garlic pasta, what he used to eat in his territory was mere pig slop. Duke Victor slammed his bowl onto the oak table, shouting at the top of his lungs for more. I bluntly told him it was gone, leaving them scratching their heads with cravings. With the appetizers over, the real main courses were served. These Middle Ages folks had only ever eaten messy stews and coarse roasted meat. Where had they ever seen exquisitely prepared dishes stir-fried over high high heat in a cast iron wok. As soon as the dry stir-fried dishes without thick soups were served, these men swung their forks so fast they practically smoked. Right at this moment, I brought out a freshly brewed oak barrel of Oak Valley Dew. The moment the cork was popped, the rich aroma of a 50-degree water of life distilled spirit shot straight to their brains. Victor literally bounded out of his chair, his eyes glowing green. Earl Galahad the Lionheart carefully took a sip, his face instantly flushing red as he shouted, "Good wine. Drinking this fine nectar, a knight could die with no regrets." This bunch of drunks was completely captivated. They kept asking me where I got it, demanding to buy 80 or 100 barrels to take home and drink like water. I sneered inwardly. I was waiting for exactly this sentence. I told them that a single pound of this liquor required 30 pounds of top-tier wheat, and the crafting process was extremely complex. I mentioned that in a couple of days, my wife would open a tavern in the bustling King's Road commercial district of London, selling it at the astronomical price of 100 gold sovereigns for a small barrel. Colin cursed me, saying I was crazy for gold coins, but I knew that these lords, who owned territories of 1,000 households, lacked nothing but money. I treated them to this meal and gave each of them a barrel for free when they left. With these walking billboards out in the world, there was no way my low-cost distilled liquor wouldn't make a massive killing. While I was at home harvesting these military commanders like leeks, a drama of distant royal relatives trying to force the king's hand was playing out outside the Red Keep in London. The Cornwall family's youths had been publicly humiliated by me in Oak Valley Village, especially young Roland, who was literally scared to death by Victor. Unable to swallow this insult, they brought hundreds of clansmen to kneel and mourn outside the throne room of the Red Keep. The ringleader, the Duke of Wessex, cried and snot-nosed his way through an accusation, claiming I was harboring rebels and refusing to let go of Duke Victor. King Edward saw right through them instantly. Catching rebels was fake. Wanting to kill me, the blind man, was real. He tried to speak in bureaucratic circles to brush them off, but the Royal Minister of Agriculture jumped out and used Albion's ancient noble laws to pressure him. He questioned Edward. "On what grounds did you strip the founding Duke of Cornwall of his titles and dismiss him from office just for a minor dereliction of duty? If the law can be changed at the king's whim, what noble in the world would dare risk their life for the royal family anymore?" This move was too venomous. It put Edward directly over the fire. If he didn't compromise, these distant relatives from the Cornwall family, united with the 7 ancient bloodline families, would absolutely use this as an excuse to cause trouble, maybe even start a rebellion. Edward's face twitched violently with anger. Swallowing his broken teeth, he outwardly agreed to restore the Duke of Cornwall's title and promised to personally visit Oak Valley Village to investigate the truth. Only then did he manage to send the Cornwall family away. Returning to the king's study, Edward smashed his oak desk to pieces, roaring that he would uproot the Cornwall family entirely. Turning around, he changed into commoner clothes, went undercover, and ran over to my house. As soon as Edward entered, he started acting. He bragged about how, in order to make me a marquis of 10,000 households, he almost chopped off the heads of his civil officials in court, painting himself as great and glorious. I cursed him in my heart for being shameless but played along with my words. After the setup, Edward lowered his voice, saying the king wanted to completely wipe out the Cornwall family, but lacked a justifiable excuse. He asked if I had any brilliant strategy to preserve the royal family's reputation while still killing off the Cornwalls. I almost laughed out loud. Wanting to be a dictatorial monarch while maintaining the reputation of a saint, this was so Edward. I calmly told him I had a plan, but the time wasn't right yet. As long as he went back and hurried to set up the paper factories and movable type printing presses, once knowledge was no longer monopolized by the ancient bloodline families, eradicating the Cornwall family would be as easy as flipping his hand. Hearing this, a flash of wild joy crossed Edward's eyes. He hurriedly ran back to issue the edicts to speed up the work. No sooner had Edward left than another scheming old fox in London set his sights on me. The Duke of Lancaster sat in his study, so anxious his hair was falling out. Because of the Damascus refined steel method I presented, which yielded 100 pounds of high-quality steel a day, the royal army would never again use the scrap iron forged by the Lancaster family. Seeing his family's biggest cash cow dying, the Duke had a sudden brainstorm and set his sights on his daughter, Lady Eleanor. He didn't care at all that I was blind. As long as he could get the secret steel forging formula, he was willing to shove his beautiful daughter to me as a wife. He issued a strict order to his daughter: "Tomorrow, wear the most luxurious corset dress and invite me to go for a spring outing at the 10-mile Rose Sea outside the city." Early the next morning, my legal wife Illyra, who was never one to avoid a spectacle, dragged her bedchamber maid Maggie to London to open the tavern. The signboard hung the poem I had plagiarized. "Where can one find a cup of warm, strong spirit?" The shepherd boy smiles, pointing far away to the fragrant Oak Valley. She used the classic night tavern gimmick of offering free tastings. When old Tom took a sip, the overbearing aroma of the liquor, released the moment the cork was pulled, hooked all the drunks from the Plantagenet Grand Tavern across the street. Even the astronomical price of 2 silver coins per ounce couldn't stop this crowd of starving alcoholics. Among the crowd buying alcohol, an uninvited guest slipped in. A seemingly frail young girl in a white linen robe named Fiona threw down 10 gold coins. With one hand, she tossed up a 50-pound oak barrel of liquor, caught it steadily in her palm as if holding a toy, and with the nimble footwork of an assassin, flipped over a red brick wall and vanished into the alleys. She brought the liquor back to the backyard of a hidden monastery. Inside the yard hid a seductive woman wearing a black veil, violet, and a vigorous old man, Elder Thorne. When Elder Thorne pried off the wax-sealed cork, the moment he smelled the liquor, his burly frame trembled violently. He took a gulp, his face instantly turning red, and exclaimed that this was the nectar of the gods. The old man, over 80 years old, firmly believed that my claim of receiving revelations from a prophet was absolutely a cover. He was convinced I was a hidden chosen one of God who had been to the Elysium city of silver that their hidden order yearned for. These people suppressed their killing intent, deciding to wait for the assassins of the Knights of the Hidden Order to assemble before prying the secret path to Elysium out of my mouth. Completely unaware of all this, I was riding in a carriage toward the middle reaches of the River Thames to keep an appointment at the 10-mile Rose Sea. Eleanor stood beside her carved carriage. Watching me approach, she was so nervous her breathing became ragged. To kill her hopes, as soon as we met, I smiled and told her that I had already been married in a country church for over 3 months, and my wife was a commoner girl whose personality perfectly matched mine. Hearing this, all the color drained from Eleanor's face, and her eyes instantly turned red. She never imagined that she would be out of the game before she even had the chance to confess her feelings. But I still accompanied her into the sea of roses. We hadn't walked far when a fat man, deliberately pretending it was a chance encounter, walked toward us. It was none other than the Duke of Lancaster. This old fox pretended to be ignorant, pulling me into a flurry of pleasantries, and then suddenly changed the subject, revealing his identity. Putting on the airs of the king's brother-in-law, he smilingly said he had taken a fancy to me and wanted to recruit me as his son-in-law. I feigned helplessness and reiterated that I already had a commoner wife. The Duke of Lancaster finally showed his foxtail. He sneered, saying that as a dignified marquis with a fief of 10,000 households, how could I match with a village girl? As long as I annulled the marriage or demoted my first wife to a maid and married his daughter instead, I would instantly become a royal heavyweight who could walk sideways in London. Hearing this, I almost burst out laughing. This old geezer was ugly, but he sure had beautiful thoughts. He didn't care about his daughter's life or death. All he wanted was my steel forging formula to save his family's business. I dropped my smile and replied coldly, "A wife who is shared in hardships cannot be abandoned. Vows made in poverty cannot be changed. When words do not agree, even half a sentence is too much. Farewell." With that, I picked up my cane, turned, and walked away. Behind me, the Duke of Lancaster cursed me furiously for rejecting his favor, grabbed his aggrieved, weeping daughter, and stormed off. I had barely finished offending the Lancaster family to the core when I stumbled right into another romantic debt. "Excuse me, is that Mr. Arthur ahead?" A crisp, pleasant voice blocked my path. I stopped my cane. Using the holographic radar of my mind's eye, I deduced from her voice that she was an exceptionally beautiful girl. She introduced herself as Cecilia, the legitimate daughter of the kingdom's chief scholar's family. Having long admired my talent at the Bard gathering, and happening to see me fall out with the Duke of Lancaster, she gathered the courage to approach and ask for guidance on poetry. Since I had nothing else to do, I decided to give her a lesson. She recited a rose poem she had written. Although it rhymed according to classical sonnet rules, it was as bland as plain water. I told her that composing poetry isn't just about looking with your eyes. It requires the epic exaggerated realism method in your brain. She humbly asked for instruction, and I didn't hold back. I fired my ultimate move. I told her, to write about a waterfall, you must write, its flying waters plunge down 3,000 feet. You'd think the Milky Way itself had tumbled from the highest heavens. To write about a high tower, the perilous tower reaches high into the clouds. I could reach out and pluck the myriad stars from the sky. To write about a snowscape, 1,000 mountains, and no bird in flight. 10,000 paths and all human tracks erased. To write about the roses right here, it must be. The red rose grows in the southern lands. When the spring breeze blows, how many branches does it sprout anew? When these eternal masterpieces smashed down on her, Cecilia was completely stunned. Her eyes widened, her small mouth slightly open. The look she gave me went straight from admiration to that of a fanatical believer. Before leaving, blushing, she summoned her courage to invite me to go boating on the King's Swan Lake in a few days. I casually tossed back a "if I have time, I'll go," turned, and boarded my carriage. The moment the carriage started moving, I struck another deep pose. Adapting a poem by a great Tang Dynasty scholar from my past life, I recited the Song of the Rose Monastery. Others laugh at me for being too mad. I laugh at them for being too blind to see. Without the desolate tombs of ancient kings in sight, with no flowers or wine, I can only forge my long sword into a farmer's hoe. I left Cecilia standing exactly where she was, completely overwhelmed by this crushing dimensional strike of poetry. Half an hour later, Cecilia rushed back to the study of the grand scholar's family. Looking at her father, Scholar Albert, who was engrossed in compiling Latin textbooks, her eyes were more determined than ever. She dropped a sentence that nearly made Albert's jaw fall off. "Father, I want to marry Mr. Arthur. Even if I have to be his secondary bedchamber maid, I am willing. I will marry no one but him." Albert was completely dumbfounded. Just a few days ago, he had been turned away at my door. How did his daughter go out for a spring outing today and come back declaring she would marry no one but me? But before he could ask for details, an even thornier issue crashed down on him. The York family, the most orthodox of the 7 ancient bloodline families, was currently sitting in their living room. The elder of the York family had brought Julian, a genius bard famous in the north, to formally propose to Cecilia. Moreover, her grandfather grandfather Alastair was already entertaining them in the parlor. Hearing this, Cecilia's face turned pale. Terrified her grandfather might agree to this marriage, she dragged her father and rushed frantically to the living room. In the living room, the grandfather and grandson of the York family were drinking black tea, looking full of confidence. That young man named Julian looked decent enough, but his eyes revealed an intolerable, arrogant pride. When he saw Cecilia enter, his eyes went straight, and he couldn't wait to show off. Cecilia wasn't going to humor him. In front of everyone, she bluntly told her grandfather Alastair that she had already decided to marry me, the blind prophet. The York family's faces fell instantly. Julian was humiliated into anger. He jumped out and mocked me, saying I had only won the laurel crown at a small bard gathering, and was just a frog at the bottom of a well. How could I compare to him, the first of the 7 sages of the North, who had made his name in the northern scholar circles? To show off, he smugly brought out a poem he had written, the serf selling wheat, acting as if the whole world should kneel and kiss his boots. Cecilia looked at this jumping clown, her eyes holding nothing but contempt. With a cold sneer, she unleashed full firepower. Do you know what it truly means to hold the world in your heart? Have you ever heard, under the scorching sun, swinging the hoe, the serf's sweat drips onto the parched earth? Julian froze. Cecilia pressed on relentlessly. Have you ever heard, the sharp edge of a knight's sword is forged from grinding, the fragrance of the winter flower comes from the bitter cold? Have you heard, the mountain of knowledge has a path, and diligence is the trail, the boundless ocean of wisdom has no shore, and hard work is the boat? Julian broke out in cold sweat, stepping back repeatedly. The artistic conception of these poems utterly crushed him into dust. Cecilia gave him no time to breathe. The immortal verses she had heard from me smashed into him like cannonballs. Should the great dragon one day ride the wind, it shall soar 90,000 miles into the sky. Have you heard of it? Others laugh at me for being too mad. I laugh at them for being too blind to see. Have you heard of it? Its flying waters plunge down 3,000 feet. You'd think the Milky Way itself had tumbled from the highest heavens. Can you write that? Every single line of poetry was like a resounding slap, viciously striking the faces of the York family's grandfather and grandson. The elder of the York family sprang up from his carved wooden chair in shock, his face full of disbelief. Julian looked ashen, yet he stubbornly argued that I had plagiarized it all. Cecilia glanced at him with disdain. Just because you can't write it, doesn't mean others can't. With that, like a victorious peacock, she haughtily turned and went back to her room. This wave of thunder face slapping was simply too satisfying. Their dignity completely shattered, the York family fled the grand scholar's mansion with their tails between their legs. Watching the York family's pathetic retreat, Albert dropped to one knee in front of his father on the spot, begging him to approve his daughter's marriage. Although old Alastair felt embarrassed when he carefully calculated the odds, he realized that not only did my poetic talent crush the kingdom's scholarly circles, but I had also presented the paper factories, the movable type printing press, and the refined steel forging method. I was Albion's one and only marquis of 10,000 households. After weighing the pros and cons, the old scholar gritted his teeth. If I offend the York family, so be it. With a wave of his hand, he decided to personally pick an auspicious date to formally marry off this top genius daughter of Albion, basically giving her away to me, the blind man. I had no idea that I had not only become the hot commodity in the eyes of the ancient noble families, but was also being targeted as a fat sheep by a hidden faction of assassins. The guyly super strong young girl Fiona, who had tossed a 50-pound barrel of liquor with one hand in the tavern, had already secretly infiltrated Oak Valley Village with her veiled mentor, Violet. They were sitting at a market stall in my territory eating roasted meat. They had already investigated my background thoroughly, and were just waiting for the assassins of the Hidden Order to assemble, so they could strike at me from the shadows and torture the secret of the Chosen One out of me. Meanwhile, entirely ignorant of the undercurrents surging around me, I was singularly focused on making gold coins. The 50-degree distilled spirit I spent half a month perfecting, Oak Valley Dew, completely exploded in the London market. Barry, a wealthy merchant from the northern city of York, directly hired over a dozen carriages, parked 15,000 silver coins right in front of my manor gates, and demanded to order 10,000 pounds of the strong liquor. Immediately after, the largest cloth merchant in the southern shires, Felix, and his daughter showed up. They slammed down 180,000 real gold sovereigns, intending to buy out all the top-tier roasted tea I had and use it to wage a trade war in the south. The fact that business was booming like this was mainly thanks to King Edward. Over the past few days, Edward had promulgated new policies. Not only did he abolish the despised lower-class status of merchants, but he also implemented the unified land tax, merging all exorbitant taxes and levies into a single territorial tax. The commoners and merchants went crazy with joy, running to the Grand Cathedral and the gates of the Red Keep every day to kneel and bow. Edward was also a man who knew how to play politics. He explicitly stated in the royal decree that this idea came from me, Arthur, the Marquis of Oak Valley. Good Lord, because of this, the commoners in my fiefdom were absolutely grateful to me, and even people from neighboring villages ran over to throw money at the street stalls in my village market. But right now, I was truly troubled. Hundreds of thousands of silver coins and copper pennies were piled up in my master bedroom's vault so high there was no place to step. I couldn't possibly build a giant vault just to store this useless scrap metal, could I? A flash of inspiration struck my mind, and I slapped my thigh. Why don't I open a royal bank? After my disciple, Prince Richard, finished his bookkeeping, I called him over for class. I asked him, Little Richard, do you think it's convenient for merchants to drag dozens of carts of silver coins all over the place every time they do business? Richard shook his head and said of course it wasn't. I smiled and laid out the entire concept of a bank. As long as we set up a branch in London and another in the Southern Shires, merchants could deposit money here, receive a forgery-proof parchment promissory note, and go over there to directly withdraw the equivalent amount in silver. And in the middle, we would only take a 0.5% commission. Richard was an absolutely brilliant math genius. The moment he heard this, his eyes turned green. How terrifying was the daily trade volume of Albion. Taking 500 coins for every 10,000, this was absolutely an endless money printing machine. To prevent forgery, I taught him Arabic numerals and the split-and-two double wax seal anti-counterfeiting concept. I told him to hurry to the Red Keep, find his dad Edward, and our master-disciple duo would partner up to open this bank. As soon as Richard ran into the Red Keep and reported the bank concept exactly to Edward, Edward's jaw nearly hit the floor. He slapped his thigh wildly, exclaiming that this was a great deed that benefited both the nation and the people. On the spot, he finalized the decision to give the exclusive privilege of opening the bank entirely to Richard, who was not even 9 years old yet. This made the Duke of Lancaster, who was observing the court at the time, drool with envy. Ever since my Damascus refined steel appeared, his family's scrap iron business had died. Edward only gave him a half-dead royal weaving bureau to keep him on life support. Now, hearing about the bonka-godifying business of immense profit with zero risk, Duke of Lancaster's eyes went red with jealousy. He slapped his thigh in regret. Falling out with me at the 10-mile Rose Sea meant he was completely blind. To get a piece of the pie, this old fox went back and immediately changed his face. He called his daughter Eleanor to the study, waved his hand and said, "Daughter, your father won't stop you anymore. Keep going after that blind man. Even if it's to be his secondary bedchamber maid, do it." He wasn't heartbroken for his daughter at all. He was clearly lusting after the mountains of gold and silver in my hands. At this time, I was leisurely sitting in my manor's vegetable garden, loosening the soil. The potatoes, corn, and peanuts I planted 2 months ago had all sprouted. What excited me the most were the over 100 chili pepper seedlings, which were already hanging with finger-thick, red and green peppers. Just as I was calculating how to make chili sauce in a few days, old King Harry strode into the courtyard with a swagger. First, his worldview was shattered by the waist-thigh corn, and then he locked his eyes on my bright red peppers. "Arthur, my boy, this red fruit is so bright. It must be a rare delicacy, right?" Old Harry asked, swallowing his saliva. I casually teased him. "It's called a chili pepper. It's absolutely an earthly delicacy." Hearing this, old Harry thought it was some sweet fruit. Taking advantage of my distraction, he turned his back, sneakily picked a fully red chili pepper, and took a huge bite with a loud crunch. The next second, the show began. I saw the old king's face swell into the color of pig liver at a visible speed, the veins on his neck bulging out. He smashed the half-eaten chili into the dirt, inhaling sharply with a hiss-sha sound. Trembling all over, he pointed at me. You actually tricked this old man into eating alchemical poison." Sitting in my rattan chair, I almost died laughing. Old Harry rushed forward like a madman, grabbed my linen shirt, his eyes popping out. "Antidote! Give this old man the antidote quickly." I peeled his hands off, rolling my eyes in disgust. "Look at what a coward you are. I told you it's a chili pepper, meaning spicy pepper. If you eat it raw and it doesn't burn you, who would it burn? Go drink some water." Old Harry finally reacted. He hugged the wooden water jug and chugged wildly, jumping up and down in the courtyard from the spice, sticking out his tongue and cursing me for being rotten to the core. He swore that if he ever took another bite of a chili pepper in this lifetime, he would take my last name. I sneered inwardly. "Wait until my spicy roasted meat is ready. Let's see if you can escape the law of true fragrance, inevitable hypocritical enjoyment." Just then, the gatekeeper announced that Lady Eleanor, daughter of the Duke of Lancaster, had arrived. Hearing this name, my wife Illyra's face instantly turned cold. How the Lancaster family had looked down on us before was etched into her memory. Without a second word, Illyra marched out to the door and blocked the steps. Eleanor was quite polite, offering 2 exquisite mahogany boxes and saying she came to apologize. Illyra didn't even look at them. She sneered and unleashed full passive-aggressive firepower. "Lady Eleanor, how can low-born commoners like us be fit to casually associate with royal heavyweights like you? Our small temple cannot house a giant Buddha like the Lancaster family. Please take your gifts back." Eleanor had been spoiled since childhood. When had she ever suffered such anger? Her eyes instantly turned red, and tears fell from her grievance. Sitting to the side, old Harry couldn't stand watching this. He actually found that scheming old fox, the Duke of Lancaster, quite annoying, but he had a good impression of Eleanor. Smiling, he added fuel to the fire. "Illyra, my girl, this old man doesn't like hearing these words. Your house can't fit the giant Buddha of the Lancaster family, but it can fit me? What, is my royal family inferior to his Lancaster family?" Hearing this, Illyra instantly lost her fire. Before she knew old Harry's identity, she dared to talk back, but now that she knew he was the abdicated king, how could she dare overstep? Seeing the situation had cooked long enough, I tapped my cane, walked out, and laid it out plainly. "Lady Eleanor, I am a merchant. I do not like the political intrigue of the Red Keep, nor do I have any desire to befriend the heavyweights of the court." This sentence was like a sword, directly severing all her hopes. Eleanor's face turned pale as she bit her lip hard. She wasn't stupid. She heard the rejection in my words, and she heard that I was guarding against her father's schemes. Fighting back tears, she lifted her skirt and curtsied deeply to me. "Eleanor understands. I will not come to disturb the Lord Marquis in the future." With that, she covered her face, rushed onto her carriage, and left the manor crying. Watching the carriage depart, Illyra, acting like a child who had done something wrong, tightly gripped my sleeve. With red eyes, she apologized to me, afraid that being too petty had made me angry. I rubbed her head and said softly, "What woman in the world is willing to share her man with someone else? The fact that you guard your food so fiercely just proves my status in your heart." Hearing this, Illyra smiled through her tears. I thought my days would continue so peacefully, but I never expected that a bloody slaughter aimed at me had quietly descended. That evening, the sky was growing dark. Illyra and the maid Maggie had finished selling liquor in London. Carrying a cart full of 5,000 silver coins they had earned, they were escorted by Captain Marcus, the one-eyed, and 8 elite kingdom veterans on horseback, driving the carriage back to Oak Valley Village. As they reached a secluded forest next to the King's Road, Marcus, who was laughing and chatting on his warhorse, suddenly changed his expression. His hairs stood on end. He violently flipped off his horse and roared, "Enemy attack! Raise shields! Draw swords!" Before his words faded, the sharp shriek of a whoosh tore through the air. A heavy crossbow's refined steel bolt pierced straight through the neck of a veteran guard nearby. Boiling blood sprayed all over Marcus' face. The veteran desperately clutched his spurting throat, collapsed beside the carriage, twitched, and died. Marcus' eyes instantly went bloodshot. He roared, ordering a guard named Bob the Bear to break out and bring reinforcements, while he led the rest to defend the carriage to the death. Bob had just vaulted onto his horse when a black-clad assassin wielding a two-handed greatsword rushed out of the thicket and decapitated the warhorse in a single strike. Bob tumbled to the ground, got up and tried to run, but the black-clad man hurled his long sword like pinning a bug, piercing straight through Bob's back and nailing him firmly to the dirt. He died on the spot. Marcus' heart sank heavily. He drew his meter-long heavy knight's sword and charged at the young black-clad assassin like a mad tiger. Marcus struck with a devastating overhead cleave. The assassin raised his sword to forcefully block it. With a massive clang, sparks flew everywhere. The black-clad man's arms went numb from the shock, and he nearly dropped to his knees, a flash of terror passing through his eyes. But he quickly reacted, using the opportunity to kick Marcus back, roaring, "Work faster." Marcus looked back and shattered. Over a dozen highly trained black-clad killers had surrounded the carriage like phantoms. The remaining guards simply couldn't withstand the slaughter of these professional assassins from the Hidden Order. In just a few breaths, they were all hacked to death. Blood dyed the King's Road red. Marcus took a heavy strike to his back, a gash so deep the bone was visible. But without even turning his head, he roared and pounced on 2 assassins climbing onto the carriage, using all his might to cleave them in half at the waist. Inside the carriage, Illyra and Maggie were already terrified out of their wits. Seeing her brothers dying horribly outside, Illyra forced herself to lift the curtain, her voice trembling as she shouted at the assassins, "If it's money you want, there are 5,000 silver coins in the back cart. Take it all. Let our people go." The assassin leader sneered, "Forget the gold coins. Take this woman. Hack down this old dog." Illyra's heart shuddered violently. She finally realized these people weren't robbers at all. Their target was her. "Son of a bitch, they'll fight you to the death." Marcus went completely insane, utterly abandoning his defense and using a suicidal Mad Eamon sword technique to wildly hack at the assassin leader. The leader was forced back repeatedly by this death-defying, reckless style, unable to close in for the moment. But Marcus was old after all, and having suffered several fatal sword wounds, his stamina was draining frantically. He could only watch helplessly as a few black-clad men roughly dragged Illyra out of the carriage. "If this old man were 10 years younger, I would slaughter you like pigs and dogs." Marcus threw his head back and howled in tragic despair. He suffered 2 more fatal sword wounds to his body, blood gushing wildly. Seeing her old subordinate about to die in battle, Illyra screamed in despair, "Stop! Leave him alive, and I will go with you." The assassin leader sneered, waving his hand for his men to escort Illyra and quickly retreat into the dense forest. In this life-or-death moment, at the end of the official road, 2 figures in gray robes sewn old. One young stepped out beneath the moonlight. The old man had a head of silver hair and a vigorous spirit. It was none other than the world-wandering grandmaster of alchemy and medicine, Paracelsus. Looking at the corpses littering the ground, his brow furrowed deeply, and he gave a low shout, "Lyndon, save him." His disciple Lyndon drew his 2-handed crossword and swept into the battlefield like lightning, thrusting his sword right through the assassin leader's left shoulder. The leader turned pale with shock, knowing he was outmatched. Clutching his spurting shoulder, he leaped into the dense forest and fled. Holding on to his last breath, Marcus finally lost all strength and crashed to the ground. Paracelsus stepped forward, checked his pulse, and shook his head with a sigh, saying the injuries were too severe. He took out his treasured alchemical blood-replenishing potion to forcibly keep him alive by a breath. When Marcus woke up, he stubbornly refused treatment, begging Paracelsus to take them back to Oak Valley Village to report the news to me. 2 incense sticks of time later, Maggie drove a carriage covered in blood straight into my manor. She stumbled off the carriage, threw herself into my arms, her chest heaving violently, and broke down crying, "Lord Marquis, Illyra was taken. Marcus is dying. The brothers are all dead." The moment I heard those words, my brain buzzed with a boom, but I forcefully suppressed my rampaging killing intent. I grabbed Maggie by the shoulders and shouted sternly, "Stop crying. Tell me exactly what happened in detail." After hearing Maggie's tearful account, I took a deep breath of cold air, my eyes as cold as ice. "They took no money, only the person. Don't be afraid. Illyra will be fine. Their target is me." I immediately turned around and issued a death order. Old Tom the gatekeeper stayed behind to sound the village's warning gong. In just a moment, a 300-strong elite private militia comprised of retired veterans assembled in full armor, radiating murderous intent. I ordered them to conduct a carpet search along the King's Road. I want her alive or I want their corpses. Sitting off to the side, old Harry could no longer just listen. At the foot of the Red Keep, the wife of a marquis of 10,000 households of the Great Tang, no, the Kingdom of Albion, was publicly kidnapped. He stood up abruptly, fully displaying the majesty of a king, and pointed at the shadows, roaring, "Royal Shadow Guards, get the hell out here. Go to London immediately, find Edward, and tell him to dispatch the Iron Guard Knights to search the city for me right now." The Royal Shadow Guards, hidden in the dark, received the order and vanished into shadows, heading straight for the Red Keep. After arranging the pursuers, I turned and walked toward the carriage. Old Harry looked at the old man who had come with the carriage and called out his title in surprise. "Grandmaster of Alchemy, Paracelsus?" My heart stirred. The kingdom's Grandmaster of Medicine. I hurried forward and placed a hand on my chest to thank him, but Paracelsus shook his head gravely. "This veteran has 5 external wounds on his chest and back so deep the bone is visible, and he has lost too much blood. I did not bring enough alchemical herbs with me. I'm afraid he won't survive the night." I had men carry the bloodied, mangled Marcus into the main hall and coldly replied, "Grandmaster, he suffered fatal external wounds. At this point, herbs are completely useless." Paracelsus frowned, thinking I was speaking nonsense. "If not herbs for external wounds, then what?" I snapped my head around and roared at the servants. "Go to the cellar and get the strongest, high-purity alcohol. Tell the cook to boil water and boil all the clean linen bandages to sterilize them." I turned back to face this Grandmaster of Medicine whose name shook the entire continent, speaking word by word. "These wounds did not sever his main arteries, so they do not need staunching. What I need to do now is disinfect his wounds and then sew his flesh back together." Disinfect? So? Hearing these 2 unheard-of words, Paracelsus' eyes widened sharply as he stared fixedly at me. "Tonight, not only am I going to make those kidnappers die without a burial place, but I am also going to tear my knight back from the hands of the Grim Reaper right in front of this Western Grandmaster." The candlelight flickered. Using tweezers, I bent a red-hot steel needle into a crescent moon shape and dropped it into a bowl of alcohol to disinfect it. Grandmaster Paracelsus and old King Harry watched from the side, dumbfounded. They couldn't figure out how I, a blind man wearing an eye patch, could accurately thread a needle. I felt my way to sew up the bone-deep sword wounds on the heavily injured Marcus. As I sewed, I gave this world-renowned Grandmaster a class in modern microscopic bacterial medicine. I lit a bowl of 80-degree high-purity alcohol, and blue flames leaped up. I told him that there is an invisible, microscopic life form in this world called bacteria, which is the culprit behind festering wounds causing death, and this burning alcohol is the divine artifact to kill bacteria. Hearing this, Paracelsus excitedly bowed deeply to me, his eyes red as he sighed. "The truth rests in your hands. If I had known this method of disinfection earlier, who knows how many crusaders' lives I could have snatched back from the hands of death." Old Harry also got reedied, pounding the table and sighing that if the army had this technology, his old brothers who lost arms and legs wouldn't have been tortured to death by festering wounds. Marcus' life was saved. I walked into the courtyard, only to find the entire Oak Valley village lit up with torches. All the serfs and commoners in the village heard that my wife had been abducted, and with red eyes, they grabbed their pitchforks and hammers, ready to search the mountains. My heart warmed, but I suppressed my anxiety and persuaded them to go back. No sooner had the villagers left than the earth-shattering sound of horse hooves echoed from outside the village. I swept the area with my mind's eye and saw, to my surprise, that Edward had even put his golden lion armor on backward, his helmet crooked, as he led the god of war Richard, Iron Fist Victor, Wild Boar Colin, and this group that made up half the kingdom's military might, charging over with murderous intent. As soon as Edward jumped off his horse, he grabbed my arm tightly, his eyes red as he guaranteed, "Marquis Arthur, I have already ordered the vice commander of the Royal Knights to lead a heavily armored army of 50,000 to lock down all surrounding counties. Even if we have to dig 3 feet into the ground, I will bring the Marchioness back safe and sound." I inhaled a sharp breath of cold air and immediately yelled, "Stop! Your Majesty! Recall the army immediately! You absolutely cannot do this." Everyone was dumbfounded, thinking I didn't care whether my wife lived or died. I calmly analyzed the situation. There were several thousand silver coins in my wife's carriage. The kidnappers didn't take a single copper, only the person. This proves they aren't after money. Their target is me. If an army of 50,000 moves in, once they are driven into a corner and kill the hostage, my wife is doomed. Hearing this, Edward's face grew so dark water could practically drip from it. Gritting his teeth, he asked me if it was the Cornwall family's doing. I shook my head. That bunch of second-generation brats didn't have the guts or the clean, efficient methods for this. Edward was helpless and could only order the army to withdraw, but he forcibly left behind 4 high-level royal shadow guards, giving them a death order that even if they died, they had to block swords for me with their corpses. After Edward and his men left, I sat alone in the courtyard, my hand tightly gripping the sword hilt of my concealed cane. In the dead silence of the night, I spoke coldly. "The 2 of you on the roof and the 2 behind the wall, you can go back." With a few thumps, the 4 peerless royal assassins jumped out of the shadows, looking at me like I was a monster. They couldn't figure out how the stealth of elite inner palace experts could be seen through by a blind man. I didn't bother wasting words with them and laid my cards on the table. I am waiting for the people who kidnapped my wife. Hide in the house and don't alert the snake in the grass. Sure enough, at 1 a.m., a slender figure wearing a white linen robe sprinted across the roof beams as if flying. The intruder was a curvy female thief, the very same super-strong girl who bought liquor earlier, Fiona of the Hidden Order. Holding a teacup of black tea, I said coldly, Since you're here, why hide? Fiona flipped lightly onto the ground and sized me up with a smile. Worthy of being the prophet favored by the gods, you have good ears. You want to save your wife? Simple. You come with me. A life for a life. The royal shadow guards in the house panicked. Throwing knives instantly flew from their hands, and the four of them surrounded me like they were facing a great enemy. I coldly ordered them back. I'll go with her. If my wife dies, all of you will be buried with her. Maggie, tell His Majesty tomorrow that no one is allowed to punish these guards. Having delivered my final instructions, I walked willingly toward Fiona. This wild girl didn't say a word. She grabbed the back of my belt, hoisted me up, and flipped right over the wall. She sprinted through the night at an astonishing speed. Being carried like this was uncomfortable, so I grumbled in annoyance. Running like this, don't your feet stink horribly? Fiona's body stiffened abruptly. Humiliated and angry, she yelled at me to shut up, but her speed noticeably slowed down. Carrying me, she plunged deep into the dragonbone black forest. After crossing several mountain ridges, in a pitch-black, secluded valley, I finally met the main force of these hidden order kidnappers. Over a dozen killers wielding heavy swords, a sinister elder Thorn, and Violet, who wore a black veil. My poor wife Illyra was tied up tightly and thrown in a pile of hay, a rag stuffed in her mouth. I forcefully suppressed the killing intent raging inside me and pretended to have the panic appropriate for a blind man. Reaching out into the empty air, I fumbled around. Wife, where are you? I deliberately lunged forward and grabbed a handful of the veiled Violet's full cleavage. Violet shuddered as if electrocuted, cursing me in shame and anger for being a dead blind man. I quickly feigned an apology. Illyra took the opportunity to break free of her ropes, threw herself into my arms, and cried, telling me to run. I patted her back, turned to Elder Thorn and said, let my wife go and I will stay. Furthermore, you must have a woman escort her back. Although Elder Thorn was impatient, seeing my unyielding attitude, he had no choice but to agree. Violet volunteered and carried my wife away into the night. As long as my wife got home safely, today, not a single one of these people would leave alive. Following that, Elder Thorn ordered his disciple Tima to carry me, and the group sprinted continuously through the Black Forest overnight. When we rested at dawn, Elder Thorn finally revealed his foxtail. He leaned in close to me, his eyes shining as he asked, Prophet Arthur, since you are the chosen one of God, you definitely know where the path to Elysium is, right? When I heard this, I almost laughed out loud. These country bumpkins actually believed this. I immediately activated my acting skills and sighed heavily. Go to the divine realm? It's too difficult. You must go to the frozen wastelands of the extreme north to dig 10,000 and ice to make a bowl, and then, on a winter's night, summit the absolute peak at the top of the world. Angels will receive you there. Elder Thorn trembled violently as he listened. The surrounding killers all gathered around, mesmerized by every word. I added more fierce fuel. Elysium is so beautiful. The gods use a magical communication mirror called a mobile phone to speak to each other from afar. When they go out, they ride a steel alchemical beast called a car that travels 1,000 miles a day, and an iron bird called an airplane that soars through the clouds. I hyped up modern technology wildly, and these medieval bumpkins, who hadn't even worn velvet before, had eyes filled with fanatical yearning. And at this moment, the entire city of London had completely turned upside down. At daybreak, Edward learned that I had become a hostage and anxiously sent shadow guards to the Red Keep. Hearing this news during the morning court in the throne room, he completely raged on the spot. He slammed his hand on the throne, pointed at the Great Hall, and roared. The entire Royal Knight Order is to mobilize into the Black Forest. Victor, Colin, take 40,000 troops and search the mountains for me. Even if you have to dig 3 feet deep, you must find Marquis Arthur. All the officials were dumbfounded. Imperial Censor Lucius jumped out and offered a desperate admonition. Your Majesty, the London garrison has a total of only 50,000 troops. If you pull away 40,000, what will happen if the Viking barbarians in the north attack? How can you disregard the foundation of the kingdom for a mere marquis? Edward narrowed his eyes and directly started talking total nonsense. What do you know? The Vikings saw that Marquis Arthur was managing his territory too well and grew jealous of Albion's prosperity. They sent 20,000 Viking assassins to infiltrate the royal capital and kidnap the Marquis. I am going to exterminate heretic spies. Lucius was shaking with anger, cursing the king for fabricating military intelligence. Edward erupted in thunderous rage and ordered Lucius' head to be chopped off on the spot. This kicked the hornet's nest of the civil official faction. Iron-faced Chief Justice Sterling took the lead, removing his badge, and over 100 civil officials collectively knelt on the floor to force the king's hand, shouting, "We ministers are willing to share the same guilt." Edward's hands trembled with rage, but he didn't dare genuinely execute the entirety of the 7 ancient bloodline families. He could only take the out, gritting his teeth and ordering God of War Richard to take the royal seal and recall the army. As a result, that old fox Richard limped his way out of the grand hall, insisting he had fallen off his horse yesterday, broken his leg, and couldn't walk fast, vividly performing an extreme masterclass in monarch subject stalling tactics. While the royal court was jumping like chickens and flying like dogs, my manor was equally busy. When Lady Eleanor of the Lancaster family heard I was kidnapped into the Black Forest, she scrambled and crawled all the way to Oak Valley Village. As she ran through the door, she scraped her knees, bleeding profusely. Illyra used alcohol to disinfect her wounds, and the pain made this noble young miss suck in cold air. Seeing how desperate she was, Illyra's heart softened. With a sigh, she laid it out in the open, "Do you like my husband?" Eleanor blushed and admitted it. Illyra held her hand and made an astonishing decision. "When my husband returns safely, I will arrange for him to accept you as a secondary wife. From now on, we are one family." Eleanor was so excited she wept tears of joy. Right in my courtyard, the two women single-handedly settled the grand matter of my lifelong marriage. Meanwhile, I was in the Black Forest, coldly watching a good show of dogs biting dogs. By evening, Elder Thorn ordered the men to bury pots and cook rice. Using my holographic radar senses, I clearly saw this old bastard sneak a packet of alchemical poison to the cook, who slipped it into the oat porridge meant for the master-apprentice duo, Violet and Fiona. After eating my fill, I crossed my arms and fished for information from Elder Thorn. Extremely smug, this old geezer told me that their hidden order was a major sect born to seek the gods. To ensure the supreme leader's bloodline was pure, the previous leader had children with his own aunt, the current one with his own sister, and the next young leader would marry his own twin sister. Hearing this, my stomach violently churned, and I barely suppressed the urge to vomit. They actually treated deformed children born of inbreeding as a divine bloodline? Right at this moment, with two thumps, Violet and Fiona collapsed limply into the mud. Elder Thorn walked up to them and gave a cold order. "Our hidden order alone will monopolize the divine realm. People from other branch sects have no right to go. Tima, kill them." Fiona cried loudly in terror, while Violet shrieked, begging him to spare her disciple. Tima raised his crossword, just about to strike, when a scum knight in the hidden order named Phones stopped him. Phones stared lecherously at the stunning master and disciple, swallowed hard, and said, "The brothers have been pent up in the mountains for over a month. It's a waste to just kill them like this. Why don't you let the brothers have some fun first?" Although Elder Thorn scolded him for violating sect rules, to win over the young leader's confidant, he actually silently agreed. Violet closed her eyes in despair. I slowly stood up, tapped my cane on the ground, and spoke with a cold sneer. "Elder, just now Sir Phone said these two possess quite some beauty, and hearing this, my mind is also a bit stirred. I wonder, could I, this blind man, be allowed to go first?" Everyone froze. Violet trembled with rage and cursed furiously. "You dead blind man, a beast in human skin. I carried your wife home, and you actually bite the hand that feeds you." But Phones smiled lecherously, nodding repeatedly and saying he must leave the best for me, the prophet of God. He turned and directed 4 subordinates to carry Violet and her disciple toward the small woods. The corner of my mouth curled into the cold smile of the Grim Reaper. The very moment Phones turned around, the concealed sword inside my cane let out a shrill dragon's cry draw. Schwing. Phones only felt his body suddenly sink, his line of sight instantly dropping. Puzzled, he looked down, only to see that both of his legs had been cleanly severed from the knees by a single sword strike. Blood surged out like a fountain. Before he could even scream, I was like a phantom in the night, instantly vaulting over his head. The long sword in my cane transformed into a cold silver moon blooming in the darkness. Slash, 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 slash. 4 fine heads rocketed into the sky. The 4 assassins carrying the women didn't even make a sound before instantly turning into 4 spurting headless corpses. Warm blood drenched Violet and Fiona from head to toe. In this lightning-fast instant, Elder Thorn and Tima were completely terrified out of their wits. They couldn't believe how could a blind man with covered eyes strike with a sword as ruthless and precise as a demon. This blind man is faking it. He can see. Timo's eyes practically tore open as he raised his great crossword to deliver a devastating overhead cleave aimed at me. I sneered, raising my long sword to meet the blow head-on. With a massive clang, Timo's greatsword was nearly snapped by my strike. He was blasted back 3 steps, his eyes filled with boundless terror. "Today, all of you are staying here to be fertilizer for the forest." I closed the distance, flicked my wrist, and swept my blade across the board. 2 more heads rolled onto the ground. Elder Thorn's courage shattered. He roared madly for Tima to cover him, turned, and ran. Tima, the disciple, was even better. Shouting, "Hold them off, mentor, I'll go back and report." He bolted in the opposite direction faster than a rabbit. What a loving master and filial disciple. I scoffed. Without even looking at the fleeing Tima, I locked onto Elder Thorn relentlessly. As the old man fled for his life, he frantically kicked down bole-thick dead trees to block my path. After a chase lasting the time it takes to drink a cup of tea, the 80-year-old man exhausted his stamina. With red eyes, he turned around to fight me to the death. "This old man will take you down with me. You think you're worthy?" I sidestepped to dodge his blade, flipped my sword to send his weapon flying, and simultaneously stepped on his arm. With a flash of my longsword, I cleanly severed his left arm at the root. Elder Thorn fell into a pool of blood, screaming in agony and begging for mercy. "Lord Arthur, I am an 80-year-old man. Don't you feel that killing me violates knightly honor? It'll violate your mother." My sword fell. With one strike, I sliced his windpipe open. A leaking gurgle came from Elder Thorn's throat as he swallowed his last breath in despair. The moment the elder died, a booming buzz echoed in my mind. To my surprise and joy, my mind's eye holographic radar had actually leveled up from the slaughter. The original 400 IR detection range instantly doubled, and my depleted stamina was instantly refilled. So killing these villains acted as my EXP packs. I sheathed my sword. Hearing the sounds of Tima fleeing in the darkness, I sneered and didn't give chase. As for Phones, who was crawling on the ground with severed legs, I left him to be an extra meal for the beasts of the Black Forest. I retraced my steps. When passing by where Violet and Fiona were hiding, I pretended not to notice anything and walked straight past them. The master and disciple covered their mouths tightly, not daring to breathe. Only when my footsteps completely faded did Fiona weep tears of joy. Mentor, he's gone. We're safe. Violet, however, was deathly pale, looking in despair at the corpses littering the ground and the thick stench of blood. Fiona, don't celebrate too early. Such a heavy stench of blood will attract the beasts of the Black Forest. Before her words faded, from the depths of the dark forest, a soul-shattering tiger's roar suddenly echoed.